This is Project Nightshift, a 1993 Dodge Ram W350 that we pulled out of a barn and gave quite an attitude adjustment. We doubled the horsepower, took the suspension to all new heights, and gave it a cool custom paint job. Follow along on our journey as we transform this iconic Dodge into a two-tone, one-ton highway hauler.
You're watching PowerNation.
Hey guys, welcome to Music City Trucks. It's a beautiful day here in Tennessee, and we're on the hunt for our next project. You know, it's been a while since we've done a diesel truck build, but we're looking to change that today.
Yeah, and what we've got here on this little farm hiding in that barn up there isn't necessarily a barn find, but we did find it in a barn, and I think you're gonna like it. Let's see what we got.
I don't know about you, but I love these old first-gen Cummins.
Oh yeah, I mean, you can't beat them as an engine in a work truck. It's about as good as they ever got. I mean, it doesn't matter where your allegiance lies when it comes to trucks. It's definitely a great truck to have around. I mean, the first-gen Cummins is undoubtedly one of the greatest engines of all time.
Whew. There she is, my friend.
Look at that.
Crown jewel.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely tell this thing's been around here for a while, but based on the outside, I was expecting much worse under here.
What I like about these is like just the bolt-on mechanical horsepower. So easy to work on, they're so simple. Arguably, these Cummins are like to diesel dudes what LSs are to hot rod guys.
What's about we see if we can get this thing started?
Did he give you the key?
No, but if I know farmers, it's
got it
right there. Moment of truth. Oh, man.
Love that sound.
Let's get this thing out in the sunshine. I mean, now that it's out in the daylight, man.
Not a bad looking truck, is it?
I don't think this guy knows what he's selling. Yeah, up, down, fast. We got a lot of decisions to make here. Based on how it sounds, it definitely been taken care of.
Let's get her back to the shop.
Yeah.
Well guys, here it is, our latest project, a 1993 Dodge Ram W350 first-gen Cummins, one of the most popular and sought-after truck models on the market today. When you step back and consider anything and everything a truck guy loves when it comes to benefits and features, this thing has got it all.
We're gonna transform this Dodge W350 from a dream work truck into a working man's dream truck. First, we'll give the engine a turbo boost along with bigger injectors and all new hardware to double down on torque and horsepower. It's also gonna get a fresh paint job and engine dress-up kit to match its new exterior.
On the underside, she's getting all new suspension, including a front coilover conversion and rear four-link. We're also going to update all the axles and soup up the stopping power with a rear disc brake conversion. And what kind of overhaul would this be without some new shoes? So, we're throwing in a new set of custom wheels and tires to match its stance to the style.
Next, we scrap the stock look and hit it with a dark two-tone black and gray metallic coat of war paint with a pencil-thin red pinstripe. As far as the bright and shiny stuff goes, we're adding a custom grille along with blacked out front and rear bumpers.
Then, we'll swap out those old trucker lights with some state-of-the-art LEDs. And for the interior, we've got custom seats, door panels, a new dash, and tricked-out digital gauges. We've christened this new diesel-powered dually dynamo as Project Nightshift.
Yep, looks good.
Now that we have our game plan, it's time to get started on tearing this thing apart. And the first step is gonna be to pull this power plant because that is gonna be the biggest piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, and these old Cummins definitely have some weight to them. So after we're done unhooking everything up top, we're gonna lift the truck up and drop the transmission and the transfer case just to lighten that load up a little bit. I don't know what kind of a yahoo puts a Ford battery in a Cummins. That man should be put in prison.
I don't know who puts a radiator drain in such a bad spot, but that guy needs to go right along with him.
Call me crazy, but I don't think Dodge ever intended anyone to ever have to pull one of these things.
Well, if you take care of them, you probably never have to.
Ha! You ever set down pliers or a ratchet and you just go, where did I put that? Been right in front of your face the whole time.
Only after searching around the shop for 10 minutes to try and find it. Now that we've got room for the bolts to come out, we might have to spin it over.
You ever wonder about the first dude who ever did a Cummins swap?
I'm willing to bet that there was quite a bit of liquid motivation behind that one.
You know what? That's where most good ideas come from.
Your liquid motivated ideas must be better than mine. And when you go to pull your front drive shaft out, the easy way to do it is to make sure you put your transfer case into 4 high or 4 low before you get under here to try and get it out. But if you forget, take that pry bar, just put it right inside the yoke and break right loose. Oh no, it's a little stuck. Fixed it. Yeah, get that out of here.
It's an endeavor, ain't it?
It really is. There's no easier way to do it. I think we've got...
Might have to pivot it.
We're hitting on this exhaust a little bit too.
She's caught on something. There we go.
Ah, she ain't caught on nothing no more.
See? That wasn't so bad.
Ah, not at all. Easy day.
She free?
Watch your head.
That's a yes.
We didn't need that anyways.
There we go.
Give her a shot right there. This is... All right, there we go.
She's pretty much in a bind still.
Hitting anything?
Nope, good. Good. Send it.
All right, out she goes.
Good news is that was not a pain in the butt.
Right? All right, hit that lever, drop her down some. There you go. Now that we got ourselves cleaned up a little bit, get dirty all over again to actually get this thing out of here.
Right. Cool. Let me get out of here.
Oh, you don't want to ride it?
Don't tip me.
Yeah, I'll just put a ratchet strap around you and you'll be fine. Well, now for the fun part. Ooh, it should be good and loose, right?
So far, so good.
Definitely a good bit heftier than what we usually deal with.
A little crane's going ugh right now. Gotta spin her a little bit.
You got eyes on?
Yep. Just gonna have to wiggle her out a little bit.
Neil McCoy style. Hold on. There you see. There she goes. Whew, that sounded good. All right, how you looking?
All right, so far, so good. Oh, hold on.
How you looking?
Still good.
Nothing attached?
Nope. I'm gonna get out of here. Don't stand underneath it. It's got about 1,000 pounds right there.
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess now, gotta get this thing cleaned up and torn apart.
Right?
After we clean ourselves up
Yeah.
again.
That'll take a couple hours.
With our Cummins Diesel displaced from its home in this engine bay, it's time to get it set up on a stand so that we can clean it up and tear it down before we start throwing new parts at it. But unlike our last inline six that we dealt with in here, the sheer weight of this thing is a serious consideration.
That's right. This thing is in the neighborhood of 1,100 pounds, so it's going to present a serious safety concern if you even remotely try to put it on your standard old engine stand because you're already at capacity. So what are your options? Well, you could go out and get you one of these bad boys, an industrial strength engine stand specifically designed for diesel engines. This particular model is set up for a Duramax, but you can go out and get the adapter plate for B-Series Cummins. But one thing to consider, between the adapter plate and the stand itself, well, you're knocking on the door of about 4,000 bucks. And for those of you at home who understandably may not want to shell out that kind of coin, there's always Plan C.
And in the case of this plan, C stands for custom. What I have in front of me here is actually a body cart that's meant to have the frame or the body of a truck put on top of it whenever you're doing any kind of work on stuff like that. And we're gonna be using our Forney cutting and welding equipment to fabricate our own type of adapter so that we can put an engine on here instead of a frame or a body. Now, the first step to doing that is gonna be to get everything lined up because all of these uprights and these two cross beams right here are completely adjustable. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get these 4 posts in line with each other and then take some square stock and cut some beams to go across here. Now, once we have a beam on both sides, we're gonna take our engine and rest it between the two. Then we're gonna put some uprights on those and use those to mount to the original motor mounts on the engine itself. A couple options to support the front and rear of this engine would be to either have these adjusted right to the edges of our engine block and put individual supports on either side and bolt those in, or we could actually tighten them up and do some V-shaped supports on this central beam that holds these two together and bolt those to either side of the block. But we're not gonna be making that decision until we get some cutting and welding done to get our main supports made. Now, I know what you're thinking. We already mentioned cost as being an issue with the diesel engine stand, but that's not really the case with this. Now, this cart, to buy one brand new, is actually under $1,000. But if you don't feel like spending that much money, you could just buy the tubing and build it yourself because it's a really simple design. So the first step to actually building our custom apparatus is gonna be to cut some of this wide tubing that is gonna serve as our cross members on the uprights. Now, I've already gone ahead and marked this at 40 inches because the engine block itself, with the accessory drive removed, is 32 inches from front to back. That means that our uprights are never gonna be further apart than that. So we're gonna cut this a little bit long to make sure we've got plenty of it and that we don't have to worry about it shifting front to back and falling off. That one does need to come out just a little bit on there. Looks pretty good. All right, with our main supports cut, it's time to roll this over to our engine and see how it fits in the middle. Now that we've got our main support beams onto our cart, we're gonna do some measuring and get some angles set up for the actual engine mounts. Now, the engine mounts in the truck sit at a perfect 45-degree angle, which makes this quite a bit easier. So with our angle locator setting on our support beam right here, we're just gonna use that to kind of judge where the engine mounts on the engine side have to sit before we weld our brackets on. We're gonna build one side and use that so that we can get the other side built and everything's gonna sit level and be accessible once it's set up on here. Once we've notched our beam, we'll tack and weld these together to make one solid piece. Then we'll go ahead and drill a hole so that we can bolt into our actual engine mount.
After some sweat from our brow, we've got our 5.9 12-valve Cummins sitting on the engine stand, ready to rock and roll. We plucked this thing out of our Ram W350 that we have christened as Project Nightshift. And in all honesty, fun's just beginning.
That's right. We've got a long, long list of performance parts we want to bolt onto this thing and a tried and true recipe to make it look awesome. But before we do that, we've got to get it sealed up, sprayed down, and ready for paint. I've seen a lot of rough-looking engines come through this shop with a lot less miles on them, but once we pressure wash and scrub down this 6BT Cummins, it should probably look pretty close to brand new.
Good news is, by the time this bucket's filled, it'll be lunchtime.
Oh yeah.
You can smell that degreaser from here, though. That's the good stuff. A lot better than most 170,000 mile engines I've seen. Anytime you're cleaning an engine outside like we are, you always want to limit your effect on the environment. So we're actually using a water-based engine cleaner. You can also just use some dish soap or whatever's at your disposal. All right, we'll let that degreaser soak in a few minutes, and then we'll give her another spray down.
See if we can get this turbo busted off of here.
Good luck on that manifold. Looks like some of them bolts are welded on there.
Oh man, that's half the fun. Don't you just love dealing with old exhaust components?
Can't say that I do.
No, man, it gives you, you know, if you're having a bad day, it gives you something to get angry at.
Not wrong on that one.
At least with this one, we're replacing everything, so.
Now for the most part, we are pulling off all the accessories, but we're gonna keep our VE pump and our power steering pump on for now. And there's a reason for it. Both of these are tied into the timing on the engine, so to pull those off, we'd have to pull off the timing cover and all that jazz. And we're not looking to get into all that quite yet, but we will a little bit later on. So for right now, we're just gonna mask these off, and then we'll touch up the paint later. Get a little tight.
90% of the time, it works 60% of the time. I said that backwards, but.
It's just because you're used to working on a rusty old Ford.
Beautiful.
About to get oil all over your engine stand here, Eric.
Call that rust preventative.
Right. Makes you wonder if I'm even here right now.
I don't know if anything's here anymore.
Fumes from the diesel.
Well, I think that's just about everything we need off there for right now. Get this thing over to the booth.
Oh.
Make sure all these fittings are sealed off.
Yeah, anywhere there's a sensor or access to the combustion chamber or anything of any of the internals.
Yeah, I don't think we want to get any of this paint inside the crankcase.
I don't know. I've heard paint adds like 10, 15 horsepower.
I mean, it is a Cummins, so it probably wouldn't hurt it any.
It doesn't matter if you're doing like a hood or a door or an engine. At the end of the day, it all comes down to the prep work.
Well, you've got to have a good base for anything you're doing.
More specifically on an engine, and I've seen this a lot, is got to have a clean base and a clean surface area because paint does not mix well with any carbon buildup. Diesel in this case, or oil, like all that stuff's just got to be cleaned up.
Well, yeah, stuff like that, that just makes the paint jump right off, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, and especially with the solvents, like anything with brake clean or anything like that, you know, your paint and your hardeners are all covalently bonded, and when you expose them to those elements and they just start fighting each other, the whole thing just falls apart.
I can rattle can with the best of them, but I haven't really done a whole lot of proper painting, as it were.
I'm all about crash courses.
Heavy on the crash.
Now you guys may have noticed that we didn't do any prep work on our valve covers. That's because we're gonna be replacing these with some aftermarket ones. So it's okay if we keep them on there for now, just so we don't get any overspray on our valve train.
And the same thing goes for our timing cover. That's gonna be getting replaced as well, so we're gonna leave it unmasked.
Well, I think our epoxy's pretty much flashed off.
Yeah, it looks pretty good. Almost don't even need the paint.
Well, you say that, but I think it's gonna look pretty good with that POR 15 black on it.
Oh, definitely.
And because we sprayed that epoxy, we got less of a chance of any of that old rattle can paint lifting on us. Why don't you go suit up and I'll mix you up some paint.
Sounds good.
And as we mentioned before, we're gonna be using the black engine enamel that we got from the guys at POR 15. Now technically you don't have to reduce this stuff, but I prefer to because I feel like it sprays out of the gun a little bit better. And the tech sheet says you're allowed to do that. Now there is a certain way to do it if you want to do a 10% reduction. Easiest way to do it is with a digital scale. Set your measuring cup down, and then we'll go ahead and zero it there. We'll go ahead and dump in our paint. We're gonna need quite a bit for that big old Cummins engine, so I'm just gonna dump what's left in the can in here. Okay, so it looks like we are at about 200 milliliters, so that means we need 20 milliliters of reducer. 20 milliliters is not a whole lot, so you just kind of dump it in a little drop at a time. It's about 19 and a half. We'll call that good. And you can kind of see how the paint rolls off the paint stick nice and smooth. It's exactly what you're going for. If it's kind of clumpy and falling into the paint cup, well, add just a little bit more reducer. I think I'm gonna call that good.
Now, I know we had to do a lot of prep work so I could use the spray gun on here, but this is definitely an upgrade from doing a rattle can refurb. It is way easier to control the flow and get an even spread on this POR 15. Adding that reducer seems to have helped too because this is coming out and laying down really smooth.
Well, Eric, I don't know what you're so nervous about because looks like it turned out pretty good.
That does look pretty good.
Looks like she's still a little bit tacky, so I think we'll let her sit overnight and then start adding some power to this thing.
Sounds good.
Well, after a quick trucker bath and a few coats of paint, we've got our old 12-valve Cummins sitting here styling and profiling, and we're ready to bolt on some power. When it comes to that subject matter, one of the most common upgrades a lot of you diesel dudes like to do is to swap out your VE pump for a P7100 injection pump. With a VE pump, you have a single plunger trying to supply fuel to all 6 injectors. But with a P pump, you have 6 individual plungers to supply fuel to all 6 injectors. So you have better fuel efficiency, more importantly, more power. We are slapping on a larger turbo on this thing, so we need a more efficient pump to maintain our air to fuel ratio. And I wish I could sit here and tell you guys that this is a fairly easy and straightforward process, but in all honesty, there is a lot to it. But don't worry, we're gonna walk you through each and every step. But before we touch anything, we need to make sure that this engine is sitting at top dead center. Before we get started, we're gonna remove our valve cover off our #1 cylinder and zip off the timing cover. Now some of these timing cover bolts are longer than the others, so make sure you keep track of which ones go where. There are several different methods to finding top dead center on your old 12 valve. By far one of the easiest is to use your timing pin. Now basically this is just a little button that sits on the back side of your cam gear and your timing case. So as you rotate the engine over, apply a little bit of pressure to that pin, and once your cam gear reaches top dead center, that pin will slide into a little shoulder on the back side of that cam gear. The next method is to go off of your timing marks. Now if you take a look at your VE pump gear, your cam gear, and your crankshaft, you've got 4 different markings, each one of them with their own corresponding color. So as you spin the engine over, your blue should line up with your blue, and your white should line up with your white. And then finally, there's the more traditional method of pulling the valve cover off your #1 cylinder and cycling your valve train. Your intake valve should do a complete cycle of going all the way down and all the way up, and then it'll start to compress your exhaust valve, and once it's all the way seated, you should be within the ballpark of TDC. You'll just need to double check that with one of the other methods. Since our flex plate is off, we can use our crankshaft pulley bolts to help spin the engine and line up our marks. I'm taping these bolts up just so I don't accidentally mar up the threads. Gotta protect them like a newborn baby. All right, we're gonna spin the engine over now, line up our timing marks, and I'm also paying attention to my valve train, making sure that it's cycling correctly. These old Cummins got some serious compression behind them, so you may have to get a little stern when trying to crank it over. All right, got all of our timing marks lined up. Our dowel on our crankshaft is in the 12 o'clock position, and our timing pin is in. So we are sitting at top dead center. And the reason why this is so important is because both a VE and a P pump run off the timing of the engine. So if you pull the pump off, spin the engine over, and then reinstall the pump, your injectors are gonna fire out of order. But with quadruple confirmation that this thing is sitting at top dead center, we're ready to pull that timing gear. Now ideally in this situation, you would use a gear puller or even maybe a harmonic balancer puller to get this thing out of here. But for some of you guys who understandably may not want to shell out any kind of coin to buy a specialty tool, all you really need is a pair of M8 125 bolts to pop this thing off of here. As I tighten these bolts down, they're going to press up against the back side of the timing case. I'm just going to kind of turn them 1 to 2 times on each side, just that way that gear is pulling off nice and evenly. The next thing we're gonna pop off is our fuel supply line. And then we've got 3 bolts on the timing case and then 1 more bolt on the power steering bracket. I only added in 2 threads. I thought it'd be smoother than that. By far, one of the biggest hurdles you're gonna run into when you're doing this swap is unfortunately having to pull your camshaft. But before we get into all that, I've got a really cool trick I wanna show you guys on how to keep your tappets from falling down into the oil pan. While I'm gathering supplies for that, I'm gonna tag Eric in so that he can show you how to organize your top end.
That's right. Now, actually removing your valve train is not all that hard, but keeping it in order is extremely important because as your engine racks up the miles, the internal components develop wear patterns where they make contact. So if you plan on reusing what you pull out, it's really important to make sure that it all goes back in the same places. Now, taking it apart is pretty easy, like I mentioned before,
And keeping it organized can be just as easy. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can remove everything. You know, you can do one cylinder at a time, or you can do them all in stages. I'm gonna start by pulling the covers off. And away we go. Ooh, there we go. I'm trying to leave these push rods in for right now. Make this a little easier on ourselves and just crack all these loose at once. That way we can grab an impact, take them all out real quick and get everything out of the way. Dirty old diesel. Now, with the rocker arm assemblies removed, it's time to take the push rods out. And this is where organization becomes really important, because push rods are one of the things that actually wear in as your engine runs. And to show you just how that happens, we're gonna measure them as we take them out. Now, when you first install a set of push rods, generally they all come in the exact same length. But as they wear in, the length is gonna change on each one of them, and it's gonna change a different amount. This is measured in at 275.67 millimeters. And we'll measure the second one. It's 275.82 millimeters. Now, that might not sound like that much of a difference, but inside of an engine, even 1/1000th of an inch or 1/100th of a millimeter is gonna make a big difference. With all of our push rods removed, we can go ahead and remove the tappet cover off the side of our engine. Quick and easy. Loosen these up, get this fuel line out of the way. Separate this. It's not really what this scraper is for, but it was the closest thing that'll work. Just like that. Easy day. Well, now that we've got that cover off of there and access to what we need, it's time for Joel to come in and work his magic.
With our valve train out of the way, we're one step closer to getting that camshaft out. Now, I mentioned a little bit earlier about a little trick about keeping your tappets in so that they don't fall down to the oil pan. It does require a specialty tool, however, and that would be a 1/2-inch wooden dowel. Now, you can pick these up at your local home supply store for relatively cheap. And for this application, I actually had to chop them down into little 1-inch sections, along with drilling a 7/32 pilot hole so that way I can fit in these little eyelets. Basically, the idea is to take each of these dowels and hammer them down into the tappets. Then we'll run some mechanics wire through the eyelets and tie it up so the tappets won't fall into the crankcase when we pull the camshaft. First step we gotta do is get these hammered in. All right, with our dowels in place, we're good to start running some wire. Basically, I'll feed it through both eyelets and wrap it around this bolt, and that should hold them up as we pull the camshaft so that everything is good to go and it won't fall down into the oil pan. All right, with our tappets safely in place, we're good to pull the camshaft. All that basically entails is a couple of retainer bolts, slowly, gently pull this thing out of here. Yahtzee. All right, with our camshaft out, good to pull this timing case. Not to mention give this old Cummins a little bit of a facelift. Now, of course, we can't tear into the timing assembly on an old Cummins without addressing the infamous killer dowel pin. For many of you at home, well, this thing was the bane of your existence. Basically what happens is this little guy over time starts to wiggle out, and sometimes it'll land on the crank gear, or if you get lucky, it'll land in the oil pan. But most of the time, it causes detrimental damage. So what are the solutions? Well, you could weld it up, or you could just pull it out, or you could take a spare piece of metal, build you a little tab that goes over it, and that'll hold it in place. The original owner of this truck already swapped out the stock cam for a 480 lift cam. And we've inspected all of our journals as well as all the cam bearings, so we're just gonna put this bad boy right back in there. You wanna be sure to take special care when reinstalling your camshaft so you don't damage your journals or any of the cam bearings. Line up our timing mark. Torque spec on your cam retainer bolts is 18 pound-feet. Cool. Cam is in. Well guys, the time is upon us. We're finally ready to stab in our P7100 pump. But before we do, I just wanted to take a step back and show you guys the sheer physical size difference between these two pumps. I mean, this thing just screams performance. It's basically another inline-six engine in itself. And really, you just got to get it in there far enough to where you can get a nut on it, and then you can use the nuts to seat it the rest of the way. All right, we got our pump completely cinched up. One thing I did run into is that each bolt had to be individually tightened in kind of like a star pattern, just so that it's seated evenly on that O-ring seal. Next step is to get our timing gear on. Make sure that when you order this kit that you get a new timing gear, because the P pump and the VE pump use different gears, so make sure you get that swapped out as well. With our new pump gear installed, I'm gonna go ahead and redo some of our timing marks. Now, one more thing I want to point out to you guys is that we bought this pump completely refurbished and stage 2 upgraded. So it's already set at 12 degrees. But if you're doing this swap at home, you can buy the timing tool and it'll cost you about 150 bucks.
Well, with timing gear reinstalled and the P-pump conversion pretty much finished up, it's time to move on to getting our new injectors installed. And of course, before we can put the new ones in, we've got to get these old ones out. Here's hoping that none of them are too stuck. Now, these aren't just any old injectors that we're using to update what was already in there. These are competition injectors with a higher flow rating than the ones that we pulled out. Now what that's gonna do is allow more fuel in, and as long as we can get more air in there as well, it's gonna produce more power. Now we made sure when we got these that we ordered with the same spray pattern as the factory injectors, because we didn't change out our pistons, so we don't wanna end up causing any issues inside. You also want to make sure you get your detent ball lined up with the slot. That way you can get your injector fully seated. And as you're tightening, you'll feel that alignment ball on there kind of slip in, because it'll start to stiffen up a little bit if it's not perfectly lined up, but then it'll twist itself just a little bit and loosen up again. Now, with our injectors reinstalled and everything torqued to spec, we need to get our feed lines installed from the P-pump. Now, it's fairly straightforward getting these lines put on because they came with the injectors, so they're already pre-formed and pre-bracketed to fit where they're supposed to go. So I went ahead and loosened up the brackets that hold them together. That way we can shift and adjust as necessary. Well, that just about does it. Just gotta get these brackets tight and throw a couple more things back on, and this Cummins is done. With only 172,000 miles on the clock, a lot of you guys would say that this truck is just barely getting broke in, and in most cases you'd be right. But in our case, we just got it and we have no clue what its maintenance history looks like. Which is why we gave our buddies over at Hot Shot Secret a call and had them send us some products that are gonna give us the peace of mind to know that our engine and our fuel system are nice and clean. First thing we did was add some diesel extreme fuel treatment so we could make sure we weren't dealing with any injector issues or had deposits that could cause further wear and tear. We'll be using Hot Shot Secret diesel products to ensure this dually is running and riding as good as it looks.
We've got our Ram W350, aka Project Nightshift, up on the lift for a little bit of an attitude adjustment. We're swapping out the entire suspension system for a brand new lift kit. But before any of that happens, we gotta roll these old axles out of our way. All right, Eric, give me a steady baseline.
We're gonna have to start making some plans here.
Plan C, I guess.
Plan C for Cummins?
It's Plan H. All right, with our old axles out of the way, we're ready to install our new leaf springs. I got Eric over there already installing the driver's side, while I'm gonna walk you guys through the passenger side. Now, for the most part, we are swapping out the entire system, but you guys don't have to get that crazy if you don't want to. One thing you can do is go ahead and swap out your factory risers for a set that is an inch or two taller. However, that can come with its own set of complications. For one, you're gonna be stiffening up that rear axle and the suspension travel is just not gonna be there, so it's gonna make for one heck of a bumpy ride. To prevent that from happening to us, one upgrade we're making is swapping out the factory leaf springs for this nice curvaceous set. That's gonna do a couple things.
One, it's going to drop that rear axle and raise the frame up to give us a nice aggressive stance, as well as a much smoother ride. First things first, we got to swap out these bushings. Now, pressing in a new set of leaf spring bushings is a fairly easy and straightforward process, but it's also one of those things that it's easy to do, but also easy to screw up. The main thing you don't want to do is accidentally cut the bushings or pre-crush your sleeves. And just like most things in life, lubrication is key. And all I'm using here is just a little bit of white lithium grease. It just kind of helps everything slide together. Then we'll go ahead and do our sleeve. All right, we got her started there, so we'll go ahead and seat it the rest of the way with our C-clamp. And if at any point you feel any extra resistance or something just doesn't feel right as you're pressing this in, just go ahead and back it off and double check and make sure everything's going in correctly. Not uncommon to sometimes have to start these with a rubber mallet. With our shackles in place, we're ready to stab in our leaf springs. This may take a little bit of mild persuasion. Now I'm using this C-clamp to kind of compress the leaf springs, so what that's going to do is bow them out so that it makes it easier to jam the front part of it up into the bolt hole.
Well, with those leaf springs finished up, it's time to get our new shocks installed. And these aren't just any old shocks, as you can see. There's a lot of benefits to remote reservoir shocks like these ones that came with our lift kit that we got from Summit Racing. The biggest benefit is having a higher fluid capacity due to the fact that there is a separate reservoir. And what that's gonna do for us is keep that fluid cooler, lead to a longer shock life, and less shock fade if we ever do end up off-road. And we wanna make sure that this truck is as dual purpose as possible, just in case we do feel like taking it off-road a little bit. We're just gonna leave it hand tight for right now. That way we've got some room to move around. Let's grab that axle. All right, looks a lot better after you gave it a bath.
Just FYI, there are a couple of leaks we'll need to fix a little later.
Ah, that's all right. We can take care of that after we get it back on the truck. Make sure these shocks stay out of the way. Keep going. Right there.
Okay.
All good?
That looks actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
Put the back bumper about right there. I dig it.
Oh yeah. Especially once we get the front done.
Don't be mean.
Oh yeah. Joel, you must have better knees than I do sitting down like there and there like that.
Oh no, they're just so shot that I lost all feeling in them permanently.
Whew, it is a tight fit.
This is easy, everybody do it.
I don't come to work to get dirty. What is this? There we go. All right, come on, baby. Whew, a little. All right, we're gonna have to. I'm not doing this by hand. Don't try me. Get out of here. You know, that's really the biggest downside to using nylock nuts is you can't actually run stuff all the way down before you tighten it.
It's almost like they don't want you to do that. Well guys, I think it's safe to say we've done right by old Project Nightshift by giving it quite an attitude adjustment and slapping on that lift kit. Now that we've kind of addressed its stance, time to see what we can do about improving its drivability.
As far as drivability goes, an old workhorse like this is always gonna have a ton of room for improvement. And the first thing we're gonna be improving on is the steering. That's something that a lot of people don't really think about, but it can make a huge difference in your driving experience. The first upgrade we're gonna be making to our steering system is gonna be to replace our gearbox with one that has a higher ratio. The one that's in here from the factory has a ratio of 15:1, meaning that for every 15 degrees you turn your steering wheel, your front tires are gonna turn 1 degree. The one that we're installing has a 12.7:1 ratio, which means that the steering is gonna be a lot more responsive. But before we can install that, we gotta get this old one out of the way. Just because I know that there's probably gonna be some leakage out of here. Well, this is gonna be so much fun. At least this thing's not too heavy. Down you go. There we go. And the shaft. Whew. All right.
With our steering box out of the way, now's a good chance for us to go ahead and inspect our frame. Now over time, your steering box gets exposed to a lot of pressure, therefore can cause a few stress cracks here and there. You guys at home with Chevy C10s know exactly what I'm talking about. Initial inspection on our frame looks like we've got some minor surface rust, but it's still solid. There's a few scratches here as well, but from what I can tell, this thing's in great shape, so we're good to move on to the next step.
Now, our next step before we actually get this steering box installed is to make sure that it's centered. Now, wherever you get your steering boxes from, they can tell you all day long that they're centered when they show up, but you should always verify just to be sure. Now, centering a steering box is a pretty simple process. Now, I've got a mark here on the input shaft, or you can pick a fixed point on the steering shaft itself that you can monitor as you turn this box. Since this set screw is at the top, we're gonna use that as our point to watch for how many turns we're making. Now, what you're gonna do once it's maxed out to one side, go ahead and just turn it and count the revolutions as you get to the opposite side. 2 and 3. So we've got 3 turns from lock to lock inside of the steering box, which means that we need to go 1.5 turns to have it centered. We'll just give it 1.5. All right, now that we know our steering box is centered, we can go ahead and get our pitman arm put on. Now this part is pretty straightforward. I'm just gonna go ahead and give it a couple of taps to seat it a little bit. Very careful not to hit your threads. And just like with anything else like this, I'm gonna make sure it goes on evenly. Now we're not fully installing this quite yet. We're gonna come back and torque it after we get it installed in the truck. This is just to make sure that we don't have to worry about it falling off of here. And we're actually gonna remove our steering shaft, that way we're not fighting with it as we try and put the box itself back into the truck. Now, we're gonna pull the bracket off the old one, get it put on here, and get this thing bolted in. This is always the most fun part. Now that we've got our steering box installed, it's time to get the shaft installed. Now, we've already loosened up the set screws so we can get this slipped on, and you just want to make sure when you're slipping the U-joint on that your set screw ends up on the flat spot of the input shaft on the steering box. Joel went ahead and put some tape on the steering wheel so that I can see from out here where it sits center. That way we can make sure that everything is lined up. With that set screw in place, all we've got left up here is just to tighten up the lock nut there, and then we can move on to our sway bar. And why do I always get the tight spots?
When you're installing a lift kit on your rig, your selection of your sway bar is definitely going to be a factor, especially on how you're going to tie in to your steering linkage. One thing you can do is take a set of drop brackets and install them right onto your factory sway bar. And that's going to drop it down a couple of inches so that you can tie into your links. And then from there, you can take an adjustable drag link and tie into your steering knuckle and then into your pitman arm. What we're going to be installing is a crossover steering kit that we got from the guys at Off-Road Design. And there are many benefits to going this route. For one, it significantly cuts down on the geometry needed to just simply steer the vehicle, especially in comparison to that push-pull technique that the factory used. However, going this route means that we do have to eliminate the factory sway bar, and there are kits out there that allow you to use a crossover style sway bar if you want to go that route, but since we're installing a set of steering stabilizers a little later on, it's just not going to be necessary. Let's get this thing out of here. All right, the next step is to bust the cap off of our knuckle so that we can install our new steering arm. Before you go to install your new steering arm, you want to make sure that both surfaces are perfectly clean. Now, since these are machined surfaces, Off-Road Design recommends that you use a little bit of RTV on the outside edges. All right, with our RTV on, we're going to go ahead and install our studs. Now, each side of these studs have a long side and a short side. Short side goes down with some thread locker. Next step is to go ahead and drop in our kingpin spring. Now, since our factory one's still in good shape, we'll just go ahead and use the old one. I'm just going to tighten these nuts down in kind of a star pattern. That's going to evenly compress that spring all the way down to the bottom.
All right, with our steering arm seated, we're good to torque these down to 110 pound-feet.
The next piece of the puzzle is our center link, which we need to attach to the steering knuckle on the passenger side and then also over to the pitman arm on the driver's side. Now before you cinch down your tie rod ends, you want to make sure you got about the equal amount of thread showing on each side. Looks like on this side we're sitting at about 1 3/16, 1 3/16 on that side, so we're good to go. For right now, this center link is by no stretch set in stone. We're just trying to get it set as straight as possible so we can test the throw of our steering wheel. We will definitely have to come back and do an alignment later. All right, that should work for right there. We're gonna wait to put our cotter pins in just in case we need to make a few more adjustments, but ready for our first test run on our steering linkage. All right, our steering wheel is centered. Front hubs are straight. Let's check our revolutions. 1, 1.5, 1, 2, 3. All right, 1.5, back to straight. Cool, good to go. The last thing we're gonna be installing is a set of steering stabilizers on our front axle here. Now, any of you guys at home that have ever driven a big heavy truck like this know that going across a set of railroad tracks or even a speed bump, it could be really jarring. Now, what a steering stabilizer is designed to do is to absorb a lot of that impact using these little compression springs. And putting one of these kits in is really easy, and then it can really make a difference on your driving experience. All right, we'll keep our mounting bracket a little bit loose for right now, just till we get everything finalized. Each of these shock mounts have a little rubber bushing that just slides over a little sleeve. Goes out nice and easy just like that, with a little bit of petroleum jelly. Now these little bushings usually do pop right into place, but every once in a while you gotta use a hydraulic press or even a vise. All right, the next thing we're gonna measure is our compression of our shocks. This kit recommends that we go 4.5 inches. Like we're good on that side. Need to go out just a little bit on this side. Yep, that'll do it. All right, big guy, I got the front end all buttoned up. Ooh, looks like we got some fancy new toys.
We've basically built a little freight train between the lift kit and all the extra power we're squeezing out of that engine. So the next logical step is to make sure we can actually stop this.
Yeah, I'll tackle the passenger side if you want to get the driver.
Yeah, that works.
Swapping out your drum brakes for a set of discs is a really popular subject. Not even just amongst truck guys, but auto enthusiasts in general. And when you consider all the benefits of increased stopping power, serviceability, you can kind of see why.
That's right. If you've ever had to deal with drum brakes before, especially an older set of drum brakes that hasn't been touched in a while, you know how much of a pain you know how much of a pain they can be dealing with all the springs and stuff. Disc brakes eliminate all of that. Turn what could take hours into something that takes minutes.
You need a really, 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 really big socket.
We're gonna end up burning through all these shop towels while we do this.
Take them out of your check.
You definitely smell that this hasn't been serviced in a while. I'm here for you, Joel.
Right.
You know, I guess I probably could have left the actual brake on there, huh, since we're pulling the whole thing.
The next step in our rear disc brake conversion is to put together our hub and rotor assembly. Now the guys at EGR specifically designed this thing so that you can use the factory style hub. The next step we have to do is actually put this wheel spacer on, and it just mounts right over to the hub assembly, and then you just put in your brand new wheel studs. Now I like to put on just a little bit of NICs just so they slide in a little bit easier. Now most of the time you do have to use a hydraulic press to put these in, but in all honesty, if you got a brass pin and a hammer, go in just like that as well. And it'll probably take you several rounds of doing this, but once you've got that nice, solid metal on metal contact, as well as even threads on all your lug studs, and your wheel spacer doesn't have any play in it, we're good to put this on the rotor. Now on the back side of your rotor, you've got your 8 studs sticking up from your wheel spacers, and with the kit, it also included new flat washers and new nylon nuts. We'll go ahead and put all these down, cinch them up, and then they'll get torqued in a star pattern to 100 pound-feet.
Well, now we're ready to start getting our caliper brackets installed, starting with this adapter plate that's gonna bolt in place of the backing plate from our old drum brakes. Now we're gonna start with some of this nice new hardware that came with the kit. Get these T-bolts put in. Now that we've got that adapter plate on there, we're ready to put the actual caliper bracket on. Now this particular kit came with 4 spacers. Depending on which calipers you're using, you may need more or less spacers. But that's really gonna come down to what you're using. The actual caliper bracket goes on the back side of all these spacers. Now that we've got all that snugged up, we're gonna go ahead and torque that down, and then we're ready for our hub assemblies.
Now we couldn't go through all that work of completely refurbishing our entire rear brake assembly without also addressing the fronts. When the guys at PowerStop found out that we were building this big old colossus of a Cummins, well, they were eager to jump on the project, and they sent us a brand new set of their Z36 carbon fiber ceramic coated pads, as well as a brand spanking new rotor. Even though these rotors are OE replacements, they are an upgrade. They're made from more durable steel, so they're gonna last much longer. Plus, you can use your factory style wheel bearings and seals. All right, with our bearings and our lock in place, we're ready to move on to our pads. Now, PowerStop recommends that you use a little bit of their grease on the back side of your pads to kind of cut down on any friction. Now, I know it seems a little counterintuitive to put some grease on your brake pads, but this is actually going to cut down on noise and road vibrations, and at the end of the day, your pads actually have a little bit of play in them, so this is going to allow for a little bit more free movement. Now, on these old Rams, they've got a little bit of a shoulder on the bottom and top side of the spindle, and that allows your backside pad to sit in there nice and evenly up on your rotor. Next up is our caliper and our other pad. Now we got our caliper in place, and these have a little bit of a locking tab that sit between the spindle and the backside of the caliper. They're kind of tricky to get in there, but if you lift up the backside of your caliper, you kind of just slide it in there. And anytime you're doing your brakes, whether it's the calipers, the pads, the rotors, doesn't matter, always inspect your brake lines. Ours turned out to be a little dry rotted, so we decided to go ahead and swap them out. All right. All we gotta do now is get the other side on, complete the system, install our lockers, good to go. If you guys have never seen the inside of a Dodge W350, take a good look at this thing. And when it comes to the ideal paint project candidate, this fits that to a T. This old Ram has almost no corrosion. The cab corners, rocker panels, floors are all completely solid. That means less time welding on some sheet metal and doing any patch panels, and more time laying down some super cool color.
As far as paint jobs go, this is about as close as possible to a scuff and shoot job, which is gonna make it that much easier to execute our plan of attack. Now, the first step in that plan is gonna be to buzz down this cab with some 180 grit sandpaper and a couple of DAs. And once we get done sanding on this cab, we're gonna roll it out, rinse, and repeat with the rest of our body panels.
Well, buddy, there's no point in delaying the inevitable anymore.
Cue the music, maestro.
Now, we want this truck to have a clean, sinister look, so we're shaving off all the trim molding. Now, everything on this truck was pretty much stick-on, except for this back piece that has a couple of mounting holes that we need to fill. Well, I was hoping we could get lucky and just fill these in with the welder, but looks like these holes are just gonna be a little bit too big, and it's gonna generate a lot of heat. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab some sheet metal, and we're gonna fill these in right. It's just going to take a few tacks here to lock in our sheet metal. Once that's firmly in place, we can hit it with the air grinder to smooth everything down and get those plug welds flush with the panel.
I think I'm gonna call that good. Time to move over to the driver's side. Be sure to control your heat with some compressed air, or just slow things down to give it time to cool off. Now, we're ready to buzz off the rest of this bland body paint for our night shift makeover. I'm just using some 180 grit to make light work of this so that when we go to spray our epoxy, it has something to stick to. I hope you don't mind monotonous tasks, because you're going to be doing a whole lot of rinse and repeat until this surface is shaved down. Alright, we got our old Ram buzzed down, masked off, ready for some primer. Now the first thing we're going to lay down is a black epoxy. And I'm a big proponent of this stuff because it's tough, it's sturdy, seals out moisture, and eliminates any chance of this old paint lifting in the future. This epoxy primer uses a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning it's half primer and half activator. Overall, it lays out pretty smooth, but you can up the reducer by 10% if you're trying to stretch your primer spraying a big behemoth like we are. You have the option to do 2 light coats or 1 heavy coat for this step. If you're new to this stuff, you may try hitting it with a couple light coats to get accustomed to working with it. You always want to make sure this stuff is fully cured before you move on. Typically, that can take anywhere from a few minutes to several hours, depending on your product and your paint environment. With our epoxy flashed off, Eric is in there applying polyester primer, or what a lot of you may know as a high build primer. Now this stuff works like a spray foam insulation at your house. As it cures, it expands, and it works really great at filling in any 80 grit sand scratches that might occur during body and filler work. Unlike our epoxy primer, this stuff mixes at a 4-to-1 ratio. It's also super thick, so a 2.5 or 2.8 millimeter tip on your paint gun is going to be your best friend. Even though it is very thick, if you apply it too lightly, it can harden up on you like concrete and become very difficult to sand. So take your time with this stuff to make sure it won't cost you more labor later. With our truck cab at a good stopping point, we're going to focus our attention towards the bed. Now, much like the cab, this thing's in pretty good shape. However, we do have a little bit of damage on our driver's side bed flare here. And what a lot of you guys at home like to do is just swap these out for a junkyard one, because these are made out of fiberglass, and doing a repair like that can be a bit of a daunting task. Or is it? Now basically what I've done here is ground out the center of the crack to relieve the stress. And what that's going to do is shift both edges from sitting on top of each other to nice and even. Our next step is to build our patch. Most fiberglass repair kits are going to come with this woven cloth that's going to be used as your primary foundation for your patch. Now basically you just lay it over your work area, guesstimate how much you need, and just cut it to size. Now some guys like to just use this for the backing on their patch, but this one's pretty deep, so I think it's gonna be good if we do both sides. But that also means we gotta do one side at a time. All right, with our patches made, it's time to mix up some resin. Now the ratio on this is roughly for every ounce of resin, you need about 10 drops of hardener. All right, about 2 ounces right there, so that means we need 20 drops of hardener. Hopefully I don't lose count. 3, 4, 5, 6, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. Now this stuff doesn't harden super fast, but you still need to be aware of your time slots, because you need to get your patch on as soon as possible so that it sticks nice and evenly, like so. You really want that resin to seep in to your cloth. Once it's stuck on there, do both sides. Now feel free to go a little crazy on this step because you can't really oversaturate it. If anything, it's only going to help it. If you can, try and do this in a well-ventilated area or even do it outside. Stuff can get kinda nasty. All right, that looks pretty good right there. We'll let that sit for about 20-30 minutes. All right, looks like our resin is completely cured, so I'm gonna cut this down with some 80 grit. The light is green, the trap is clean. Now you're probably watching this and saying, Joel, why are you working in such awkward positions? Can't you just pull this off and set it on a panel stand and work with it that way? Well, we need to keep the fenders bolted in on the truck so that they maintain their shape. If you pull them off and then attempt to repair, it can warp them and distort them and cause a whole mess and can of worms that you don't want to get into. Now the next thing we're going to be applying is what a lot of you refer to as kitty hair, which is basically a fiberglass filler. Now this stuff is a lot sturdier and more rigid than your standard body filler because it has almost no flexibility. But it is a key part of the process because it's going to maintain the structural integrity on your fiberglass. Now there's no mathematical equation to exactly how much hardener you need. You just need to make sure that you start with kind of a dime size amount and realize that the more hardener you put in it, the faster it's going to set up. I like to use kind of the figure 8 technique where I'll swipe, do a figure 8, swipe till she's good and mixed. It's kind of hard to tell with this stuff because it really won't change color all that much, but you gotta just kind of use your best judgment. So far this process has never failed me, so knock on wood. And I'm gonna kind of start with a light coat. I'm pushing it in as far as I can go. That way it's filling all the pores of that fiberglass cloth in there. And then once it's got a good foundation under it, we can pile it in there. Can't forget our backside. Our next step is to slap on some body filler. Now this is going to fill any pores or any imperfections that we might have missed with the kitty hair. This is also going to keep that kitty hair from shrinking back after we lay down some primer and eventually our base coat. Once it's dry, you're good to knock it down with some 80 grit and you can come back and smooth back over with some 180 grit. Then you're ready for primer. Well, other than needing to clean up a couple of these edges, I'm gonna call that a successful repair. And now that we know that our shape is good and it's gonna stay in place, we can take this bed flare off, start sanding the rest of this thing down. Where's Eric?
Before we actually get started on any of the work we're gonna do, we gotta get this chassis all cleaned up and ready to go to have that body drop back on it. So, it's montage time. Montage. Instead of thrilling you with tips and tricks on how to spray water to clean off dirt, thought I'd hit you with some truck trivia about our Dodge. In 1993, Dodge produced close to 50,000 diesel-equipped trucks. And on December 12, 1991, Dodge rolled their 100,000th Cummins Ram off the assembly line. Our Dodge has a Cummins in it, but they didn't only make truck engines. Cummins made engines for all kinds of vehicles, and each one had their own CPL based on what they were going in. CPL stands for Control Parts List, and that CPL will show you every part in your engine. You can find it on your engine ID tag on the driver's side, just in front of the injection pump on the side of the timing case. Our Cummins CPL is 1579, but in 1991, all Cummins CPLs had to be updated to reflect changes to the engine to meet EPA emission standards. Our Cummins has that updated CPL tag since this Dodge is a 93. Now that we've got this frame all cleaned up and ready to go, it's time to get some POR 15 rust preventative coating put on here, not just for looks, but also for protection. Yeah. That's the good stuff right there. All the nooks and crannies. Now this is where it helps to be just a little bit amphibious, so you can use your other hand. No?
You're looking for ambidextrous? Amphibious means you're a frog.
Ribbit. This POR 15 is gonna make our frame look good next to our custom paint job, and it's gonna prevent it from rusting over once we get it back out on the road.
I'm almost done getting this POR applied on the frame. And once I get finished up with this, we're gonna let it sit and dry for a while before we put it up on the lift to get the bottom side of the frame rails and the cross members. Now while we're waiting for that, let's talk gear ratios. Your ring and pinion gear ratio is a crucial decision with any project. But how do you make sure you get the right setup without spending a ton of time and money on trial and error? Now in our case with Project Nightshift, we want it to be a good all-around truck so that we can go highway cruising, long hauling, or have a little bit of fun off-road. Now what that means for us is we need a gear that's gonna be good and torquey in the low end, but not strung out when we're at highway speeds. Now before we start calculating, there's a few numbers that we need to know or at least be able to estimate for. Your vehicle speed, engine speed, tire size, transmission gear ratio, and your ring and pinion gear ratio are all related. Now if you know 4 out of those 5 values, you can use those to calculate for the unknown 5th. Now let's just start with vehicle speed. Now you're gonna take your engine speed and multiply that by your tire size, and you're gonna take your transmission final drive ratio, multiply that by your ring and pinion ratio, you're gonna multiply that by 336. And once you have those 2 values, you're gonna divide them, and that's gonna give you your vehicle speed at that RPM with that tire size, that final drive ratio, and that ring and pinion gear. Now, since we're trying to keep the RPMs down on the highway, that's what we're gonna calculate for first. We're gonna plug in 70 miles an hour, because that's the standard speed on most interstates. Now, tire size, this truck had 235 85/16s from the factory, which is roughly a 31.7-inch tire. Now, the transmission ratio, the final drive in the factory transmission, was 0.69. And our final number is gonna be the factory ring and pinion ratio of 3.54. We're gonna get started by getting our equation down here, solving for R, going for 70 as our value for vehicle speed, multiply that by our final drive ratio of 0.69, multiply that by our ring and pinion ratio of 3.54, multiply that by 336, and that is gonna get divided by our tire size of 31.7. But if you wanna make it even easier on yourself, you can get online, go to our website at PowerNation TV, and we actually have a bunch of different calculators, including a gear ratio calculator, so that you don't have to try and do all this math by yourself. Solving for RPM, gear ratio of 3.54, tire diameter 31.7, speed of 70, and a final drive ratio of 0.69. That gives us 1,812 RPM. So let's plug in some numbers. For an engine speed of 1812, for tire size options, let's go ahead. We're obviously going bigger with the lift kit, so we'll calculate for 33s, 35s, and 37s. The transmission we're getting has a final drive ratio of 0.62 in 6th gear. Ratios that we're gonna explore are gonna be 373, 410, and 456. We're trying to keep this RPM at 70 miles an hour or lower. So any number that's below 70 over here can immediately get canceled out, because that is not gonna work for what we're doing. If you've watched this from the beginning, you'll know that we already put a 6-inch lift kit on this truck, which means that 33s, especially on a lifted 1-ton, are gonna be a little bit small. So let's go ahead and get rid of those too. The options that we're left with are the 35s and the 37s with any gear ratio on the 37s, or 373s or 410s on the 35s. If you look at the middle ground with the 410s, we've got a good intermediate speed, and that's gonna get us off the line quicker than the 373s. Let's go ahead and knock out the 373s just because that's not what we're really looking for. The 456s, being the deepest gears we have on this list, are gonna get us off the line the fastest, but they're gonna cut our top end down more. So let's go ahead and knock that out right now, because that number being lower means that we're gonna have even less to stretch that gear out at the top end. That leaves us with 410s and 35s or 37s. Considering our lift kit, 37s are probably gonna be a little bit of a tight fit, but we haven't settled for sure on which size we're gonna use. Either way, looks like 410s are gonna be the way to go with gears. Our ultimate goal here was figure out what gears we need, and we've done that. So now it's time to get to work. Now, you guys have seen us use POR15 products here plenty of times, but what you haven't seen us use is their American Icon paint products. It is a complete paint system with everything that you need from start to finish to get your paint job done and done right. Now, this includes your primers, your additives, base coat, and clear coat. Everything you need to get your paint job looking good. Now, every good paint job has to start with a good base, and that's where your primer comes in. And not all primers are created equal. This P101 DTS primer that we got from American Icon is quite a bit different from what you're probably used to. Let me explain. Now, when priming for paint, it's not just as simple as spraying on a coat of primer and then getting your base coat on. It's actually a process that you have multiple different stages and different products that you've got to use. For your first step, it's always going to be your base layer, which is either going to be an epoxy or a self-etching primer. Now, self-etching primers are a little bit outdated, so we use epoxy around here. Epoxy is going to go down as your base layer, which means it's going to go straight onto your substrate, whether it's bare metal, fiberglass, or body filler. Epoxy primer is highly adherent, it creates a good moisture barrier, and you can still do body work over top of it, which makes it perfect for going over our substrate. Your next step is going to be your primer surfacer. Now, this step is used in conjunction with block sanding to get you a level surface that's going to help you get that smooth as glass look on your final paint. What we use for this is a polyester or a high build primer. Now, as the name implies, it builds up a lot so that you've got something to knock down and fill in any light scratches. And once you've got your high build sprayed, it's time to start the process of repeatedly sanding and reapplying this stuff until you get that nice smooth surface. If you need a little bit of help doing this, you could always throw some guide coat on there that'll help show you the low spots, where you need to fill in, and where you need to sand down. And the last step in your process is going to be your sealer. Now, this is what acts as a layer between the primer surface and the base coat. This is going to prevent anything underneath from bleeding up and also prevent the base coat from being absorbed down into the primer layer. So if you're looking for something that'll save a little bit of space in the cabinet and some room in the budget, definitely check this out.
Tag, you're in.
Oh boy.
Now that everything is buzzed down, masked off, ready to go, we're gonna go ahead and lay down our first layer of epoxy. Now this may seem like a little overkill, looking like I'm about to go for a walk on the moon, but if you're really going for an elite level paint job, you wanna make sure you're not contaminating your surface, even if you are just laying down primer. It's good to always wear your proper PPE because you don't want this stuff getting into your lungs. Also, it's just good to practice these habits for when you actually lay down your paint. The less contamination, the better. You'd be surprised how much stuff can just be stuck to your shirt that can disfigure your perfectly planned paint project. Even your paint suit can be hiding some horrendous hazards if you don't take care. So keep it nice and clean, stowed away, and you can even wash it with some cold water before you go in there. Taking a little time and following these simple rules, you'll learn to achieve a nice, smooth, professional finish every time.
Phew. Looks like this thing's coming along great.
Man, you can say that again. It's sanded out super slick. I gotta be honest, by the time it's said and done, this old farm truck's gonna shine like glass once we lay down that custom paint.
I got that chassis in there all ready to go, got the axles re-geared. I mean, we're getting pretty close to getting this thing back on the road.
Yeah, between all that, custom paint, cool interior, aggressive stance, Cummins power, this is gonna be probably the baddest dually on the planet by the time it's said and done.
That's a pretty tall order. I don't know about the baddest on the planet, but the baddest looking, good possibility of that.
I know what I'm about, son. Well guys, today's the day that Project Nightshift gets its color back. I've got the cab and the doors in the booth with a fresh coat of sealer, and we're ready to lay down some color. We kind of went back and forth on which direction we wanted to go, but at the end of the day, we decided we're gonna keep this thing all Mopar and paint it only using Hellcat or TRX colors. The first step in our paint project is to lay down a base coat and cover our cab with some of that aforementioned Hellcat black. This pallid palette is really going to help dictate the shade of gray we're looking for on the two-tone transformation of this darkened dually. This particular black paint is laying down smooth and clean. So it's looking like we're probably only going to need a couple of coats for us to get that perfect amount of coverage to make all of that sealer disappear. Now, your paint selection is pivotal. Usually, you can always count on that the better your paint, the easier your paint job. But no matter what you use, I recommend getting some samples and doing a few spray outs to ensure you're getting the results you want within your budget. You've got to remember that this is all just a balancing act, and you've got to do your homework and decide how to best spend your money and your time. If you spend a lot of your time masking, painting usually goes faster, and vice versa. If you rush through all your masking, then you're gonna have to spend more time and be extra careful with your paint. It all really does just boil down to time, money, and technique. And typically, most of us have limited amounts of one or more. So just remember to be proactive, plan, and choose wisely, because prep and paint are arguably the most important parts of your build.
Well guys, we got a couple of layers of black on old Project Nightshift, and it's already starting to look pretty sharp. Now we went through a couple different variations on how we wanted to go with our paint scheme, and what we decided on, I think you guys are gonna like.
Now earlier we mentioned that we are painting this using Hellcat colors. One of those is the graphite silver, and from the factory that is laid on top of a gray base, but we are using a black base, and that's gonna kind of give it more of a darker undertone for that sinister look we're going for. But before we start laying down some paint, gotta start laying down some tape. Basically what I'm looking at right now is I want the top edge of my tape line about parallel with the top of the door. Now, I can't go off of this body line because it's not directly parallel with the rest of the truck. It actually kind of runs uphill a little bit. So if I go off of this body line, by the time the end of my tape line gets there, basically be too high and go up into that upper right edge. It's not what we want. We want these nice and straight. Yeah, another variation that we considered was actually going off of these two body lines right here, but there's a couple problems with that. One is that about 3/4 of the way through the door here, this body line completely disappears. So by the time you get to the back edge of the cab corner, there's really no tape line or body line to go off of. So by the time we get it back on the chassis and try to line it up with the rest of the bed, it just wouldn't look right. So I think our best bet is to just go off of that factory paint scheme. Now before we sanded this down, I measured out the distance between this body line and the bottom edge of this tape line. And really all it is a matter of taking this 3/4 inch tape, use this to run along the top edge of this body line. Right now I'm just kind of feeling the bottom edge of that tape and the body line at the same time, making sure I got a nice, consistent feeling all the way down. So right here is one of those spots. I can feel like the body line or the tape is sitting too far down on the body line. So I'm gonna peel it back just a little bit, pull that edge up just a smidge so it's more consistent all the way back up the door. Go back over it. Yep. That's what we like. So now that we got our bottom edge pretty much established, we'll just move it on up just a little bit more. Try and get that as close to the top edge of the other masking tape as possible, with a very, very mild overlap. Like a 1/16 of an inch at the absolute most. So now where we're sitting, I like to kind of take a step back and just kind of look at the big picture. I can kind of see where the top and bottom edges of that silver is gonna lay, and that is pretty dang close to where it was from the factory. It's gonna be complemented with a nice red pinstripe. Oh, I think where we're sitting right now, I think we're good to lay out the other side. Now with our stripes laid out, we're ready to go ahead and lay down some silver. What we're using is Chrysler code PAU, kind of a graphite silver. I think it's gonna look pretty sharp once we get it out there. Oh yeah, that silver's gonna make that stripe really pop. Now before we go to spray this on, I wanna talk to you about the importance of using the proper reducer for your application. Usually when I'm in there, it's hovering around that 70 to 80 degree range, which is always good to know exactly what temperature is in the booth or wherever your paint environment is, because it will affect which reducer you use. If it gets around that 85 degree or higher range, we're gonna have to use a warmer reducer. And if we don't, what'll happen is the paint and the reducer will start to evaporate as it's coming out of the gun, causing dry spots.
Reducer helps to break down the paint into smaller, more uniform droplets as it exits your gun, improving atomization and reducing the risk of any defects. Reducer can also have an adverse effect on adhesion, and when that happens, that's where you can get popping, blistering, or even the dreaded premature paint failure. They don't make a pill to fix that. And honestly, there's nothing worse than being unable to get your paint to lay down properly. Also, you want to make sure to check your gun too, because you can have perfect paint conditions and do everything right, but if your gun isn't taken care of, it could all be for nothing. If you don't take care of your gun, you can get things like orange peel or gun clogs, and that will quickly turn a dream paint job into a waking nightmare. Fortunately, the silver is having none of those issues, laying down smooth and coming out of the gun just as I had hoped. Even if you keep a squeaky clean gun and slap on a perfectly applied paint job, you still may see some distortions or swirls if there's any dents, dings, or damage you may have missed while you were sanding and blocking. That pretty new paint will conform to the shape of any imperfections, making them clearly visible. So just try and take your time, plan accordingly, and remember to crawl, walk, and then run so your paint won't. Well, we got 4 coats of our silver laid down, and it actually turned out better than we could have imagined. Now the next step is to unmask this whole thing, and there is a technique that you need to do so that you don't cause any unnecessary damage. You just want to take your time and literally pull the tape off of itself. Start in the corner here. Now it's not going to matter too much right now, but as you can see, I'm pulling this masking tape directly back onto itself. I'm not pulling it at a downward or upward angle, just straight across. That technique I was telling you about earlier, about pulling the tape back onto itself, this is where it's very, very critical. Where you got base coat meeting base coat. If you pull away at an angle, it'd be easy to pull that silver back up onto itself and it would just create a big tear in it. You have to redo everything you just did. A little nerve-wracking. It's like defusing a bomb. No matter how many times I do this, I still get nervous. It's cool. I'm cool. Nobody moves. Nobody gets hurt. Well, I pretty much got everything masked off for our custom pinstripe. And this can be kind of a daunting task that'll really test your patience, but it is a crucial step. Basically what we've done is use this blue pinstriping tape to lay out exactly where we want it, and then we masked on the top and bottom side. Next thing we're gonna do is peel off this blue and start laying down some cool color. Same rules apply here for our pinstripe tape. You wanna slowly pull it back on itself so you don't encroach on your mask that you laid down for your stripe. This tape is designed to not pull anything away from the surface along with it while you remove it. So I shouldn't have to say this, but be sure you're using the painter's tape when doing this. Don't just grab some duct tape from your junk drawer. Your paint job will be just that, junk. Now, this may be the fastest paint job I've ever done, and this red is RED red. You can see also as I'm spraying on top of this tape that it turns into kind of an orange shade of red. That's because the yellow is serving as the base coat like I was telling you guys about earlier. Your base coat will completely change the color of your paint. Kind of like when you were coloring with crayons as a kid. Mix red and yellow, you get orange. Mix yellow and blue, you get green. Just do your research before you start, or else you might end up with a batch of brown glop that you did not intend on getting. You know what? We may have to change the name of this truck to the Silver Bullet, because this gunmetal gray is looking pretty badass. Well, our custom paint scheme turned out about 99% awesome. We did have a little bit of bleed through on our silver on the top of this base coat, but that's an easy fix. All we have to do is kind of dust in a little bit of black, let that flash, lay it down some clear coat,
this thing's done. You ever notice when you're laying down clear coat that it creates this foggy effect that's swirling around and filling up the room? Well, that's from all the solvent evaporating into the air when you paint. Clear coats typically contain volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, and those evaporate quickly during the painting and curing process. As those solvents evaporate, they turn into a liquid that creates vapors that then disperse into the air when you're spraying. That chemical reaction creates a mist or fog of fine particles that become visible, giving you that bug bomb look like you're fumigating for cockroaches. This is why it is critical to wear your PPE when painting. You also need to make sure you are spraying in a properly vented area so that haze doesn't linger and get into your lungs. Now I think it's pretty clear though that this paint job is just as cool as we envisioned. It's like a dingy dark mirror reflecting back the pain that resides in my soul as I begin to realize that I still have to do this for the rest of the truck.
Today just keeps getting bigger and bigger for Project Nightshift because now that this chassis is fully prepped, it's time to get our Cummins drop back in.
Man, it's a lot cooler in here than in that paint booth.
I bet. You ready to get this thing back in?
Sure, let's give it a whirl.
About time. All right, let's.
Ready?
Yep. Oh man, I forgot how heavy this thing is. Yep. Yeah. All right. Oh, she is in. Is it just me, or is this thing sitting a little higher up than it did before?
Nah, it's just kind of, it just seems like that because you only got one shoe on. Yeah, just let the crane hold it for us for now till we get that transmission in. Purple trans.
Now that we've got the engine dropped in, we need some way to get that power down to the wheels. And obviously, we don't want to reuse this old transmission because even though we could have rebuilt it to handle the new power output, that's a lot of extra work when we could just go to ATS Diesel Performance, pick up this full Allison 1000 kit.
Yeah, there's a lot of good things about these first gens. For one, you got Cummins power, heavy duty axles, stout frame, but it always seems like the Achilles heel was these 46 RE transmissions. However, in Allison, man, it's got a whole different reputation altogether. These things are tough, good to about 300 horsepower from the factory, but the Stage 4 performance one we got, it's good up to 1,000 horsepower plus.
Of course, this wouldn't be a complete kit with just the transmission. So it has come with almost everything we need to complete this installation, including a standalone transmission cooler, fancy mounts, all of our linkages and bracketry that we're gonna need, a fresh SFI rated flex plate, and of course this fancy shifter handle with a manual shift button and a towing mode that's gonna run through our TCM, and all of that data is gonna be monitored by our standalone CAN bus.
And one more thing you need to know about this kit is it's actually a drop-in for a second-gen Cummins, not a first-gen. But you can actually make it work using a second-gen adapter plate and rear crossmember.
I guess all that's left is to get this thing dropped in.
Yeah, how are we gonna get it off the table?
I'm gonna go grab the forklift.
Good idea.
Well, we've got our Cummins mounted back to our frame, and we've got our transmission and transfer case ready to go. But like Joel mentioned, we do still need a second-gen adapter plate and crossmember before we can actually install it. So while he's out hunting that down, I'm gonna take care of some other frame-mounted components like our brake lines and our fuel system. This fuel tank is plastic, unlike most other old trucks, so there's no reason to replace it unless there's a hole in it or something crazy like that. Our first step is gonna be to get this tank cleaned up because as it sits, it would not look right next to everything else we've got back on the truck. So I'm gonna start by spraying it off with some air, using a multi-purpose cleaner and wiping it down. With the majority of this sprayed off with the air, I'm just using a scraper real quick, get some of this heavier gunk off. That way we're using less of our shop towels and try and get this thing wiped down because those add up. I'm gonna take a little bit of elbow grease doing this, and sure, you could take it outside and pressure wash it, but
In an effort to minimize the risk of water getting in the fuel, I'm just gonna clean it in here. Now, even if you're not cleaning with water, it's still a good idea to plug up any ports on the tank that might allow anything to get in. A little bit of multi-purpose cleaner shouldn't kill anything, but better to be safe than sorry. Now that we've got our initial cleaning done on this fuel tank, I'm just doing a quick scuff, because this obviously is not gonna be a real fancy paint job like what Joel's doing over there in the booth. This just needs to be scuffed enough for our undercoating to latch onto this plastic and not come off. That just about does it for getting this thing scuffed up. So now, try and wrangle this whale off the transmission stand and get it hung up so I can actually get to the whole thing and get it painted. Well, I tried to hang it up like I planned on, but clearly this guy didn't make it. It's a little more full and a little heavier than I expected, so we're just gonna have it set here on the table, hit it with a quick spray of some rubberized undercoating. It's gonna make it look good and help keep it protected. There we go. Oh God. Now, like I said, this stuff does spray out a little bit heavy, but you can get around that by just increasing your speed as you're sweeping across your piece. And just make sure you touch up any light spots as you go. Right at the end. Now, anytime you're painting anything, especially if you're using aerosol, you want to look for what's known as tiger stripes. And what that is dry spots in between your sprays of paint. And if you do see that, just give it a nice light dusting in between those two lines. You'll be just fine. Whoa. Watch your head coming in here. Whew. There we go.
Spiffy this thing right up.
All right? Crazy what a quick coat of paint will do.
Yeah, well, it's subtle changes that'll really elevate a build.
Of course, the one time that these things don't want to come out of the jack. Or maybe it's because there's something on there, I don't know. They get up, down, spun around. If we get one strap in, then we'll just put a stand on the other side so we get this jack out of here. I think we're making some progress there. Moving the right direction. You know, thankfully this thing isn't still mostly full of diesel fuel.
Right?
It'd be a little heavy if it was. Yeah, get that out of here. I don't care where it goes, but it can't stay here. This guy dropped in here. Snuggle fit there. There we go. One of the last major components we've got to put on this frame before the body goes back on is that big fancy transmission over there from ATS. But we're still waiting on our cross member to come in the mail, so we're going to address one of the last remaining things on the engine that we've still got to do before we can call it done, and that is the Serpentine system. Most of the time when you install an aftermarket Serpentine drive system, it's generally to replace the original V-belt drive that was on your engine. What are the benefits of an aftermarket Serpentine system if you already have one? Well, that's where this comes in. I've got our scale set up here on the cart, and we're gonna go through and weigh every bit of the new belt drive components and the old belt drive components. Weight is a huge thing no matter what you're doing, whether it's off-roading, race cars, hiking. Weight adds up. There's an old saying that I heard a lot while I was in the Marine Corps that really stuck with me. It's about hiking, but I feel like it applies to this too. That is that ounces equal pounds and pounds equal pain. Now, I don't think this truck can really feel, but we could definitely save it a little bit of struggle by cutting down on the weight. Start off with our fancy new AC compressor, like 10.45 pounds there. Now bracket, 3.5 pounds. That's actually really light. Alternator, 12.30. And now we're gonna do a lot of these small parts at the same time because I don't feel like picking stuff up and dropping it back down all day long. And we're looking at 3.7 pounds for these pulley covers, the hub adapter for the crankshaft, and our lower water neck for our lower radiator hose. And moving on, we've got the rest of our hardware belt tensioner and cover. The last of our parts for the aftermarket system, 8.25 pounds for all that. We've just finished weighing all of our old parts, and after doing some math to compare that to our new parts, we found out we've got a weight savings of about 20 pounds. But that's not the only advantage to one of these new systems, and I'm gonna tell you about the rest of it while I get this stuff installed, starting with our water pump that I've already got the seal RTV'd and ready to go. We're gonna take the water pump and set it on the impeller because that sits it high enough that we're not gonna have to worry about that seal or that RTV getting anything in it or on it. This water pump actually has one bolt hole that sticks out a lot further than the other one, so we wanna make sure that our bracket sits right on top of the water pump before we bolt it down. Now you are gonna get a little bit of resistance with this install because rather than a gasket, this water pump uses a rubber seal, which means that it needs to be compressed, unlike a gasket, which just kind of sits there. You actually have a little bit of a gap you've gotta close up with a rubber seal. Get our alternator installed. Aside from weight savings, some other benefits of this Serpentine system include better belt drive efficiency, upgraded components like this 300 amp alternator that replaces the 120 amp that came from the factory, and we're ditching the mechanical fan for an electrical fan to give us more efficient cooling. Well, these guys don't joke about clearance. That is close. Not to mention, this Serpentine system is gonna look great when we pop the hood on this dually.
Well, we're still chipping away at the to-do list on Project Nightshift, and the next thing we're going to tackle is getting that big, heavy Allison transmission on the back of this Cummins. Now, we mentioned before that you are going to need a few components out of a second-gen Cummins in order to make this conversion work. One of those is going to be your rear cross member, the second, your starter, and third, your engine to transmission adapter plate. Now, first-gen and second-gen adapter plates are almost identical, except for a second-gen is about an inch wider in thickness, and the starter is clocked in a different position. But other than that, these things bolt right up to the back of that block. It's good to add a little bit of thread locker to these bolts, just so they don't start backing out. Now keep in mind this is an aluminum case, so you don't want to crank down on these bolts too much. Otherwise, you will crack it. You'd miss. Now the next thing we're gonna install is this really sharp looking flex plate that we got from the guys at ATS Diesel. And this thing is included in our conversion kit. Torque spec on these is 105 pound-feet. Sweet, let's get that transmission on.
It's not too bad with the help of the crane.
Here we go.
Oh man, that's a little heavier now. How's that dowel pin looking? Oh. Damn it.
All right, go ahead and let her down. Yeah, it wasn't so bad. You got her from here?
Yeah, I think so. Just a little bit of fabrication on that cross member. Shouldn't be all that hard.
All right, man. Holler if you need me.
All right. Welding is more than just fusing metal. It combines precision, skill, and creativity. It's a dance of sparks and heat that transforms raw materials into something with form and function. Whether it's a pickup that hauls your family or a trailer hitch that connects you to your passion, welders are the unsung heroes of our industry. It can seem like a lot of work sometimes, but it's an invaluable skill that takes time and patience, and it'll reap infinite rewards if you invest in yourself and take the time to learn how to do it. Seems to be. There we go. Modifying this Gen 2 crossmember to fit our frame took a lot of time and effort, but doing it the right way and making sure it's safe and sturdy is always in your best interest when making any kind of modifications on something as important as your frame. Thank you. Sharpie cam. I've got everything bolted together and sitting just about where it's gonna stay, so one of the last steps we've got here is to get our plates welded onto this frame. Now we're welding right near the fuel tank, so I've got a welding blanket over there to cover that up for safety. But welding near fuel tanks isn't the only potentially nerve-wracking thing when it comes to doing frame work. For a lot of guys, the welding itself is a big challenge. So we got a hold of our friends over at Forney and had them come over to give us some tips and tricks to use their equipment for welding on frames.
One of the more popular subjects in the truck community in recent years has been shortening long beds into short beds. And it's primarily been done with square body Chevys, but this is not a square body Chevy frame. This is actually a 2011 F350 frame we've had sitting around the shop for the last few years. Obviously, the idea of cutting a frame and having to weld it back together is probably a little bit scary. So we're gonna try and take the fear out of frame welding and show you guys at home how you can safely shorten your frame. Now, before we start actually marking and cutting things, you gotta make sure that the frame is level, front to back and side to side. And front to back, we are perfect. So, we wanna make sure we avoid this kick up right here so we don't have to worry about any weird angles or anything getting thrown off. Now, we're gonna be using our square to make sure we get a nice straight line right across the frame. And we'll just run these lines the rest of the way down our frame. And then of course we will be double checking our measurements before making any cuts. I want to explain why we're not utilizing a Z-cut as opposed to the way we're actually doing it. With a Z-cut, you cut your frame in a different orientation so that the two halves kind of puzzle piece together. But in an effort to save time, we're going to be fully removing our front spring hangers, getting them out of the way, cutting the frame in half, getting these two pieces stuck back together, and then we'll fit the spring hanger back on. Now, we're almost ready to get this hanger off of here, but there's one more thing we need to address before we can remove it. We can either trim this cross member from our cuts here, or we can punch the rivet out, which is what I'm gonna be doing, and that'll give us at least an idea of where this hanger needs to go back on once we stitch the frame back together. Huh, just got one more side to do and then we can get this thing pushed back together. Now that we've got our frame cut, it's time to get it welded back together. But before we do that, this metal is a lot thicker than what we usually work with, and we want to make sure we're getting good penetration with the welder. So we brought Gabby back in from Forney. She's gonna help us get our welder dialed in.
The reason that we have this over here to kind of practice on is obviously so that we can make sure that this is done safe. So we're going to play around with our heat a little bit, make sure that we get good penetration and good tie-in on our welds before we get going and transition into the frame to weld it back together. So we'll play with some scrap first. What I'm gonna do first is I'm just going to pick a good setting. So we'll start at 37.7 and our wire feed speed will start around 400. So realistically, that's not a bad setting. We got good tie-in here. We do have a large gap in our cut here, so we will have to build that up a little bit, but you can kind of work past that and slowly build in your welds so that you can reduce the heat, so you reduce warping. We have a lot of weight on this frame, so hopefully we don't get a lot of movement, but it's always possible for something to distort because of heat. So let's go ahead and do another weld here and just make sure you still got a good setting.
I mean, you can already see a little bit on the top side.
Yes, definitely. Also, I took my time a little bit more and I really focused on our cut so that way I can kind of shove that wire back down into that groove and hopefully give us a little bit more penetration as well. The way that it sits now, I think we'll be fine as long as we go through and reinforce this weld before we start driving with something on it. So.
Well, I guess it's time we stick that frame back together, huh?
All right, let's do it.
That's not too bad. Gabby, what do you think? I mean, I think we're off to a pretty good start.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't look bad. Looks like you got good tie-in. You're still gonna add a brace though, right? So that way once we unclamp this, all right, awesome. I think you can go ahead and finish this out.
But I know you got a busy day. You know, you still got some stuff you gotta do with the guys down the hall. So I'll let you go and keep plugging away at this.
Awesome, well, good luck.
All right, thanks.
Well guys, Project Nightshift is about to reach another milestone moment. We got the transmission on, cross members done, we're ready to drop that body back on. Eric, hit it.
A little anticlimactic. How you looking up there?
Go ahead and stop right there. We'll have to, whole thing needs to go back.
I gotcha.
All right, let's try that.
I think we're still gonna have to come to the driver's side just a little.
Happy medium.
That's pretty close.
From what I can tell right now, just barely gonna clear, so. Oop, I might have got it.
Back just a little.
Yep. There we go. I think I got it started. I think it's lined up. Just might have to have you come down a little more.
Just a little more.
There we go. There she is, big guy.
Well,
Give her the old stamp of approval.
looks to me like we've got a cab again.
Ain't going nowhere. Let's take a step back. Looks like we got about, man, we probably got a good 2 inches of clearance on the transmission, so we're good there.
Awesome. That's one less thing we got to modify.
Air 5.
Awesome.
Now that we got the cab back on the chassis and everything on the outside's looking pretty spiffy, we're gonna go ahead and focus our attention towards cleaning up the inside. Now, as far as rust goes, we actually got pretty lucky on this old truck. There's a few spots of surface rust that I'm just gonna go ahead and buzz down with the DA. I'll rust treat those, and then we'll move on to some sound deadening. 80 grit sandpaper is going to be your ideal abrasive here. You want to be able to cut through the rust just enough to get down to the bare metal until it's smooth and shiny instead of brown. Now, there are several different companies out there that offer their own solution for rust converter. And no matter which one you buy, you want to make sure it contains something called tannic acid. What that is basically converts your red oxide rust into kind of a blackish bluish ferric tannite. Basically what that's going to do is completely seal out all the oxidation and convert it into more of a gel-like substance and keep it from rusting down the road. By far, one of the most underrated upgrades you can make to your project car or truck is adding sound and heat insulation. Now, just standing on the inside of this cab, it's almost like I'm standing inside an oil drum. And take a listen to this. And that sound just completely reverberates throughout this whole thing. But after we get done installing this Cool-It Supersonic acoustic mat that we got from the guys at Thermotech, you're gonna notice a significant difference. A little bit of forward planning is crucial here. You want this stuff to seal in nice and tight into every canyon and crevice of your cab. Be sure to press down firmly to eliminate any air pockets to create a nice tight seal. That should do for our shape. I'll go ahead and peel this backing off, get her stuck down. You're gonna want to be sure to cut out spaces for anything like your floor shifter or mounting holes for your seats. And you're definitely going to want to keep that blade or box cutter handy to trim off any excess backing or material. Now this is kind of like a vinyl top or a headliner. You want to kind of just start in the middle, spread everything out nice and tight, and work your way to the edges. Get into these little nooks and crannies and tighten it up. And don't forget to do the back side of the cab. And you can even do the inside of your door skins if you're feeling froggy. Well, looks like everything is firmly in place. Let's go ahead and do our sound test. Oh yeah, as you can hear, that is a significant improvement. And you know what? At the end of the day, this stuff is also going to help cut down on heat because black trucks in the summertime, not that fun. Another thing we got from the guys at Thermotech is this turbo sock. Now how this little guy works is basically it sits right on top of the housing, and what it does is it keeps any unwanted heat transfer from your engine bay from getting into your air intake system. Now the turbo itself is a Borg-Warner T3 that we got from Summit Racing. It's got a turbine wheel size of 74 millimeters and a compressor wheel of 54 millimeters, about a 50% increase from the one that we got from the factory. Now while I slap this thing on here, I got a little tech tip for you guys. And that would be choosing the right turbo for your application. Now from the factory, this truck had about 150, 160 horsepower, but between that P-pump swap, different cam, bigger injectors, we might be hovering around that 300 horsepower range now. So since we had about a 50% increase in power, that enables us to do 50% increase on our turbo. So what are the repercussions of using too big of a turbo? Well, what'll happen is it's gonna take you forever to build boost. And by the time you finally do build enough boost, the other dude's already gonna be at the finish line. So at the end of the day, it's good to look at both ends of the spectrum and find your happy medium. If you can find that perfect turbo for the amount of power that you're putting out on your engine, man, there's not gonna be a whole lot of dudes on the drag strip that can keep up with you. And one last thing, when you do go to buy your turbo, use a reputable company. Don't just go off of one of those auction sites that just sell the cheapest ones that they can make, because it can cause even more catastrophic failure to your engine, the turbo, or yourself.
One of the biggest dangers that your engine can face is actually one of the smallest. Particles of dirt, rust, even water can get in your fuel system and cause all kinds of issues. That's why we called up the guys over at Blessed Performance and got this FASS Signature Series titanium fuel pump and filter system. Now, the first step of this install is going to be to get this extra vent put in on our filler neck. Let's take this vent and I'm going to get it as close as possible to our inner filler neck, and then I'm going to make a mark where I've got to cut it. And if you're using this type of a cutter and you have to kind of roll your hose into it, just make sure your blade's lined up. That way, when it does start to cut, you're not off your mark. And of course, don't forget your hose clamps. We're just gonna get them snugged up and then tighten them the rest of the way by hand. It looks like this is sitting pretty close to where it needs to be, but I do need to shorten up this factory vent line a little bit, so I'm gonna go ahead and get that done.
All right, with our bed secured back into place, our truck up in the air, ready to install this fuel pump the rest of the way. First step in that process is to slide this mounting plate up into this bed rail here. Now this kit also comes with two different styles of filters. One is an air and water separator, and one is a particulate filter for all your solids. And this is also another reason why you have to have a much higher gradable pump, because you got to be able to pull all that fuel through both of these filters. And you may note on this bottom one, it has an O-ring, so just make sure you put that in before you put that filter on. All right, got both filters on, so now we just got to tie into our pigtail that'll run all the way up to the battery, which we don't have a battery yet, but we do have to also install some of these fuel lines, both our supply and our return line. Those got to run to the P-pump, so all that's just going to have to wait for another time. Now obviously we couldn't do all this cool paint work without also adding a set of tricked out wheels. So I called the guys at Custom Offsets and they sent us this set of Ultra Motorsport Scorpion 022 dualies, along with a nice set of brand new off-road tires, measuring in that 35 to 10.5 range. Let's get these things on here. Beautimous. Man, Eric and I have put a ton of work into this truck. That custom paint alone was enough to break the average builder, but we're finally getting close to achieving that look we set up for when we started this project. Cabs on, beds on, new custom tires and wheels, new turbo, transmissions in. This thing's finally starting to look like a truck again. And before you know it, we're gonna have to start sleeping during the day so we can punch that clock in for our night shift.
Today we've got Project Nightshift back in the shop, and man, this thing, seeing it in paint is getting me excited, but we've got a ton of work left to do.
That's right, and the first big ticket item we're gonna be installing today is this big purple transfer case that was painted and rebuilt by ATS Diesel while they were building our transmission. But before we do that, there's one little thing we've got to do still, and that is get our tone wheel installed on this coupler that connects the input shaft of the transfer case to the output shaft of the transmission. Now this wheel is gonna be getting installed with the chamfered side first onto the end of our coupler here. That's gonna help keep it centered. So once it goes on like that, we're gonna put it in the press to get this pressed down. We're gonna use this template that came with the installation kit as a gauge to get the right depth. It should be about 3/4 of an inch from the end there. Now before I take this out to get it pressed on, let's talk about how it actually works. Older speedometers relied on a mechanical input through a cable that was driven by a gear in either the transmission or the transfer case. Now, modern speedometers rely on electronic input from an electrical sensor, and that's where the tone wheel comes in. Now, once we get the transfer case installed with the coupler and the tone wheel, it's gonna sit just about like this. As the output shaft spins, these teeth are gonna go past this sensor. There's a magnetic pickup inside the sensor that's gonna utilize the frequency of these teeth passing by to send your speed signal out to your speedometer. So, I'm gonna go get this pressed on, we can get this transfer case installed. All right, before we head out to the press, I'm gonna be making a couple of reference marks with this template to make sure that we don't overshoot with our tone wheel. Just like that. Well, our tone wheel has met the mark from our template, and our measurement to the end came out just about right, so we're gonna be checking this a third way just to be certain that we're not gonna have any issues. We're gonna be doing that by putting this back on the output shaft of the transmission and checking the position of our tone wheel in relation to the position of the sensor. What we're looking for is the center line of the tone wheel to be within 1/8 of an inch of the center line of the sensor. Now looking and feeling around, this is just about dead on, so I'm gonna call that good, and we're gonna go ahead and get this transfer case installed.
Hey, speaking of transfer cases.
Well, look at that. The customer service here is great.
I know, right?
Slip that guy on there. All right, up we go.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the back needs to go up.
Back needs to go up.
To get the angle to dangle in the correct direction. There you go. Yeah, this one's definitely started now. Yep, she's in there.
All right, I think that's just about good. All we got left here is to get it torqued down.
Yep, tighten them up, it should be good to go.
All right.
Now it's time to tackle the plumbing for the intake side of our diesel here. I got the intercooler. We're gonna set this in, get this attached. Now the job of the intercooler is to remove the heat from the air going into the engine. Anytime you compress the air via a turbocharger or a supercharger, all those air molecules, they generate a lot of heat. So we're gonna get rid of that heat with the intercooler. That way we can get good, clean, cold air into the engine. First piece we're gonna install on our intake system is the air filter. We'll go air filter to the turbo, from the turbo to the intercooler, and it'll make a way around to the intake manifold on the other side of the truck. So first thing are these couplers here. Now these little rubber or silicone couplers, they can get pretty tight when you go to install them. So I like to shoot it with a little brake clean, kind of let it slide over. A little bit easier, make your job a little bit easier there. All right, get that one on. We've got some clamps here as well. All right, with the brake clean there. Okay, we'll probably have to clock this a little bit different once we get the fenders and the hood on to see our general location. All right, our next piece here, we got to make the turn from our turbo out to the intercooler. So we got a little 90-degree elbow. A little brake clean there. Slide it on just like that. And there's our direction. And we'll get this guy tightened up. There we go. Okay, to complete the next section, we've got to make our own tube here. I've already got it cut to length, rolled a bead on, and I'm gonna show you how to roll another bead. The reason we want a bead on that end is when we put that hose clamp down, it provides a mechanical interference so it doesn't slide off. You could leave this with no bead, but it would easily slide off once it's under pressure. So let's go to the workbench and I'll show you how to put that bead on. All right, we're gonna get our bead rolled onto our tube here. The way this works here, we're gonna slide this on here. This controls our tension between our two dies. All you have to do is just get it touch right there, touch that, and then you'll start to spin it around, make a lap, and then we'll increase our pressure, okay? You don't want to get too aggressive on that because you can actually damage it. Slow and steady there. Depending on the thickness of your tubing is going to determine how quick this goes. Now this one's a little bit thicker for aluminum, so it's going to take us just a little bit longer than normal for any type of thinner material. Once again, the reason we're putting this bead on here is to provide resistance for that hose clamp. Without that bead, as we start to pressurize that tube, it's going to increase the chance of blowing that silicone hose, that coupler off. So if we put a bead in the end of this tube, it gives a little bit of resistance for it to stay in put. My left hand, I'm just trying to keep the tube square on our fixture here. And you can control how much bead you want on this, how aggressive you want that lip. Obviously, the more aggressive you go, the more material you're moving around. All right, that looks pretty good right there. We'll go ahead and take this off and get it on the truck. Get our tube on here, and that'll complete this side of the intercooler. All right, if you ever wondering how deep they need to go inside there, run it metal to metal till it touches, like that, and then back it off just a touch. That way they're not touching, rubbing up against one another. All right, we're back on the driver's side of the vehicle now. First thing we want to do is install this heating grid. Now, the purpose of this is to warm up the air coming into the combustion chamber when the truck is cold and the engine's cold. Now, you may say, well, we'll put an intercooler on it to cool the air. Yeah, when this thing is cold, it needs warm air coming in to help it start up. A lot of diesels utilize glow plugs to achieve that. Well, this one's different. It uses this heating grid. Once the engine starts up, it gets warm, this shuts off so it doesn't negatively impact us. Now let's get it bolted on. Move our little dust cover there, gasket, and we'll drop our grid down here. All right, let's get our last tube installed. Goes right over the intercooler, on the outlet side of the intercooler. And twist this over, get that buttoned up. Last bolt, and then we'll take a little wrench to that nut because it's hidden underneath that tube. Gonna go a little slow because we have to go a couple of flats at a time just because it's kind of awkward to get to. All right, if I get a little bit more on it. All right, that one's tight. All our tubes are connected. We'll go through and double check our connections by hand, just make sure they're all tight. That wraps up all of our intake system. On to the next.
With plumbing being our priority today, we're moving right along with getting brand new brake lines built and installed on our Dodge. Now, we've already got this front axle finished up, but before we move along, let's take a look at one of these old lines. And as you can see, it looks a lot better than you would expect from a work truck that's as old as this one. Now, it's always a good idea to install new brake lines because brakes are arguably the most important system on any vehicle. Because as bad as it sucks to blow an engine or a transmission, break an axle, or throw a drive shaft, they're all made exponentially worse if you don't have brakes to stop after the fact. Now, these ones are no use to us anymore. So, I'm gonna go take a look at some tools and show you guys what you're gonna need to make your own. As you can see, we have quite the assortment of tools here on this cart, and it's all the basics for what you're gonna need to make your own brake lines. Now, like I said, this is basics, so we've got cutters, benders, and flaring tools. Let's talk about them. Now, most of your cutters are gonna be something a little like this, or even in a smaller size like that. Now, there's a lot of options out there for benders, and you could get as fancy as getting something like this that has an angle gauge, multiple sizes, and all that, but you're not always gonna need that. So, you could go as simple as making something like this for yourself. This is just a piece of square stock with some round stock welded to the outside. Then, we'll move on to flaring tools, and you've got a couple different options there as well. Now, you'll look and see this is an old school manual flaring tool that works really well, but it's not quite as fast as some of the other options out there, like these hydraulic flaring tools that you can get. Now, these come with a lot more adapters, and you could do a lot more with them, but they come with a heftier price tag. Now, this isn't quite everything, and the rest of the tools are over on the table, so let's go check them out. Before we get to use any of those tools we just talked about, we've got to talk about one more. Now, this is a brake line straightener, and you don't need it to make brake lines, but it does help out a lot. Now, all this is just a set of wheels that you run your brake line through to uncoil it because it comes packaged up in a coil like so. That's the first thing we're gonna be doing. We're gonna get this straightened out, and then we can measure to see how much we need. Now, first things first with this, we're gonna get it loose enough to run a length of our line right through. Then we're just gonna tighten up a little bit until it's grabbing and coming out straight on the other side. And once you've got it dialed in, you're just gonna unspool with one hand and pull through with the other. I find it a lot easier to do all the cutting and bending if the line is straightened out beforehand. And now that we've got this pretty well straightened out, we've got to figure out how much of it we need. Now, there's quite a few different ways you can measure for line, but I'm gonna show you one of my favorite ways using a piece of TIG wire. Now, using this piece of TIG wire and our old brake line, we're gonna line it up right at the end, and then we're just gonna follow every bend that this thing makes until we get to the very end of it, and then we're gonna cut our wire, and that's gonna tell us how long our brake line needs to be. So now, go ahead and cut it off right at the end. Well, now that we've got that done, all that's left to do here is to get this straightened out, lay it down next to our new brake line, and make our cut. Now that we've got our cut made, we're gonna go ahead and swap out our straightener for our bending tool. Now with this tool, I like to get it set with the old line. I'm gonna line this up on the ends. Now what's nice about these is you can bend by hand or you can use the whole jig. I always overbend just a little bit because 9 times out of 10 that line is gonna spring back just a little bit when you let the tension off. Like so. I'll admit this is not the easiest way to do this, but for me it seems to work the best and get the most accurate results. And now that we've got all our bending done, we can move on and get flared. For that, we're gonna be using a different type of flaring tool that we haven't talked about yet. And this one, as you could probably tell, is a little bit fancier than the rest of them. So I'm gonna get it set up in the vise, then we're gonna talk about it. Now, this flaring tool does the exact same thing as every other flaring tool out there, but this is actually the easiest way that I've found to do it. Now, of course, it's gonna be easier using a fancier tool, but there is some things you need to pay attention to while you're getting it set up. So, this flaring tool can do 45 or 37-degree flares depending on what kind of lines you're making. Now, 37-degree flare is gonna be for an AN line, and a 45-degree flare is gonna be for your standard inverted and bubble flares. And that's what we're gonna be making here today. So you're gonna look on the inside of your block, pick the 45-degree side, drop that in, get your line set. Now, initially, you wanna leave your line sticking out just a little bit. And make sure you get the top half of the block on the same degree for the flare. Now, at this point, before you guys clamp your line down, I want you to think and make sure you're not forgetting anything like I just realized that I am. Don't forget to put your nut on. So now that we've got our nut on, we can go ahead and get our line clamped down. Now, for this first operation, we're not gonna be tightening it down all the way. We're gonna take the wheel, get it installed on the tool, and set it to here where it says operation 0. That's gonna be this flat head of a bolt. And what that's gonna do is press that line down even with the end of the block here. And tighten this down the rest of the way, make sure it's in there nice and secure. Once that's done, we're gonna switch to where it says operation 1, and that's gonna give us our initial flare. Then we're gonna be going to operation 2, and that's what's gonna create our bubble. You don't wanna pull too hard on these because you can split your line with this. But once that's done, you can go ahead, get this popped out, take a look at one nice, perfect flare. And now that this is done, I've got just one more brake line to make, and then we can put a stop to this part of this project.
All right, well, we've got all of our brake lines installed on the truck. Next thing we got to do is install our master cylinder and bleed it, okay? When you get a brand new master cylinder, you have to bleed the master cylinder. You can do it on the workbench in the vise, or I like to just install it on the truck, use the pedal itself. So we'll get the fluid installed into our reservoirs. Eric's gonna jump in and use the brake pedal, and we're gonna move that piston back and forth to bleed the master cylinder, all right? To bleed the master cylinder, you have to loop the outlet to the inlet. Now, I just made some of these lines here from some material we had here at the shop. You can get the clear tubes at your parts store that loop it back in there yourself, whatever you want to do. So now we'll go ahead and fill this reservoir up. And the front. Go ahead and put some more in there. All right. Now, Eric's just gonna push the pedal down slowly, and we can start to see the bubbles coming out. We'll keep pushing the pedal down back and forth, nice and slow, until we don't see any more air coming out the fluid. Go ahead.
You ready?
Yeah.
Nice and slow.
Here you can see it, yep. And then we'll just keep doing that until all the air is out and we can button up the system, be good to go. All right, Eric, that looks pretty good. We'll go ahead and get our bleeder lines off of there, hook up our regular brake lines, and we can bleed all 4 wheels. There she goes. That one started. All right, we've got all of our fittings tight. Now we'll just top off our brake fluid.
In the spirit of plumbing and fluids, it's time to get our Dodge filled up. Front to back, we've got engine, transmission, and axles that we need to get filled up, and we're gonna be using Hot Shot Secret products in all of it. Now, starting with the engine, we're gonna be using their Blue Diamond full PAO synthetic 1540 to get this engine filled up. To get started, we're gonna pre-fill this filter. This synthetic PAO engine oil is infused with Hot Shot Secret proprietary FR3 nanotechnology that provides unsurpassed levels of longevity and improved performance. This advanced friction reducer creates a protective barrier between metal surfaces and limits metal-to-metal contact, which helps with lower operating temperatures and improves fuel efficiency by 3%, giving your engine the ultimate protection while prolonging its life.
All
This thing
right.
filled up.
There you go.
Dangerously close to finished. The higher film strength of Blue Diamond PAO provides better wear resistance that allows for longer service intervals between oil changes. It contains no wax, giving your diesel engine easier oil flow in cold weather startups that drastically minimize wear on engine components.
Now, our oil already has the FR3 friction reducer made into it, but you can buy some of this additive and add it to your oil for extra protection. If you need to know more about what's going on with your engine and the oil inside of it, well, you can send Hot Shots a sample of your oil. They'll analyze it and tell you the best products for your application.
Let me introduce you guys to Anthony Sorreo, the newest member of the Music City Trucks team.
Hey guys, so yeah, I'm Anthony Sorreo. I'm a welder and fabricator by trade. I build custom cars and trucks for myself on the side. Most of my stuff's a lot lower than this here, but yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Help you boys finish up Project Nightshift and see what else we got coming down the line.
Well, we're happy to have you. Let's get this thing finished up.
Let's do it.
Obviously, we've still got plenty of work left to do, and a lot of it is gonna be here on our interior. Now we're gonna be getting started, getting in here, and getting our headlight switch replaced. Now, a lot of the time we wouldn't show you guys something this small, but it's a really common failure point on these trucks, so we wanted to talk about it a little bit. And if you look, you'll see some burned contacts on the inside here and some melted plastic that could have come from this, or it could have come from the connector that this thing gets plugged into. Either way, that's not gonna cut it, because not only is it unsafe, but it's gonna make our lights not work the way they're supposed to. So we're gonna be getting rid of this, and we're gonna replace it with a Duralast switch that we got from the AutoZone Pro website. Now, if we look at these side by side, you'll notice that it's exactly the same, minus the burned bits of it, and that's exactly how it's supposed to be. Duralast makes sure that their parts are designed to meet or exceed OE fit, form, and function. So we're not gonna have any issues getting this thing installed, and we're not gonna have to worry about it after the fact. So now that we've got our new switch, let's check out that connector. Now, our switch isn't the only thing that's got to get replaced. This connector, as you can tell, has definitely seen better days. Now, like I mentioned before, what's happened is it's got hot from the middle and just heated its way out, melting the plastic all the way around. Now, obviously, we're going to be replacing this with a new connector. Now, I've already got this one prepped with the heat shrink on and the connectors on, so we're going to take a look at another brand new one and show you why I did that here in just a minute. But looking at this new one, obviously these wires are much heavier gauge, and that's gonna help keep the temp down in the connector to prevent that from happening again in the future. And of course, like I mentioned, heat shrink, don't forget it, especially on something like this, because getting cross contact between these connectors is gonna cause all kinds of weird problems that you really don't wanna deal with. So let's take a look at a brand new one. Now, the first thing you're gonna notice is that all these wires are the same length. And that's why I prepped the other one beforehand, because if you were to take all these wires and bundle them up like this, put all your butt connectors on and make your connections, you're gonna end up with a big bulb of butt connectors right here in the middle of your harness, and nobody wants that. Plus, having all those connectors in such close proximity increases your chances of having heat buildup and having more issues like that further down the road. So, we've got all these staggered, we've got this other one prepped already, so we're gonna go ahead and get all of these cut one at a time, placed in here, get the switch in, call it done. Now, all the wires on the new connector are the same as the factory wires, but again, just to be safe, we're gonna do it one at a time. Go for about a 3/8 of an inch strip on here. Sure, give this a little twist. And make sure we get our connector oriented the right way. Now we're gonna be adding a little bit of length on with these new wires, but not too bad. Shouldn't cause any issues. Well, with that finished up, all that's left before we can install our new Duralast switch is to get this bracket off of the old one and get it swapped over. Once we're done with that, we'll go ahead and move on, get the rest of this interior finished up.
Now that Eric's got our headlight switch installed and our dash back together, we can go ahead and finish up this seat install. Now, as you can see, we've already got our carpet installed. We got our kit from Forney Industries. It's a pre-molded black carpet kit that we got to better match the theme of Project Nightshift. Up top, we got our gauge cluster from Dakota Digital. It's their VHX option, and we got it in red to also better match the theme of Project Nightshift. Now, on the seat side of things, we've already got our TMI frame installed, along with the passenger seat and our Sport Buddy console. The only thing left to do is to get the driver's seat mounted in the truck. But in order to do that, we first have to mount these sliders onto the seat frames. Now, we're running TMI's Pro Classic low back in a black vinyl with a red stitch. It's gonna look real good on Project Nightshift. Now, these are pretty simple to install with basic hand tools, but there's a couple tricks that are gonna make your life a little bit easier. Now, the first one here, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna get the screwdriver into this hole on the little eyelet on the bracket. We're gonna go ahead and pivot that up, hold it down, stick something, either a screwdriver, maybe an Allen like I got here. That way, you'll be able to slide the slider past the hole here, so that way we can get our bolts mounted into the seat frame. And when you're putting these bolts in place, it's a good idea to put a drop of thread locker on them to keep them in place. Now, on these sliders, there is a left and a right-hand side, and you want to make sure that you get them on the right side. So this one with the handle, you want to make sure it's on the left side. So if you're sitting on the seat, you want to be grabbing it with your left hand. All right. Now, on this side, we don't need an Allen wrench in here because we have the handle. Now, the handle lets us move this spring-loaded plate up and down that catches the slide. On this side, doesn't have the handle, so we stuck this in here to kind of mimic what the handle's doing to raise this out of the groove so we can slide it and get it out of our way. So we'll go ahead and do that, and now you see, got access to the hole. We can get our bolt mounted into the frame. So our next step, what we need to do is we need to make sure that the sliders are in the same slots and they're even on both sides. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna move this one up, make sure they're lined up, and we're gonna get this wire rod that comes with the kit. Now on this kit, there's 2 O-rings that are gonna slide in, and they're gonna lock these together so that way when you pull this handle, they both move in unison. So how we're gonna do that is we're gonna take our pliers, pinch down on this back here, get these O-rings to slide to the middle of the rod. We're gonna pop this side in right here, and then we're gonna use our little Allen wrench to kind of get this one over. Get your pliers, put them right there so they're locked into that groove that's on the wire rod. Do that for both sides. should be good to go. Now the seat's ready to go in the truck. All right, get this last nut tightened down, and we're good to go. We got the seat sliders on, it works, it's operational, but we got one more thing we want to show you.
And that is gonna be to get this passenger side door panel refinished. Now we've already got the driver's side done, and there's a reason we're refinishing these instead of replacing them. See, nobody makes reproductions of these door panels, and to get used ones, you're looking at $100 a piece for ones that look like this, or upwards of $500 for a pair of new old stock ones. Now, even if you're pouring money into a project like this that's gonna be a showpiece, you do wanna save where you can. So we're gonna be doing this ourselves, save ourselves some time, some money, and some headache trying to find them. So the first step is gonna be to get this upper door panel carpeting painted, and we're gonna have to do that on here. And the reason for that is because it is plastic riveted into the back side of the door panel. So to remove that and then reinstall it would be a real pain. So we're gonna tape this off right now, get this dyed, move on. Now, I'm not going crazy trying to cover every little bit of this door panel while I'm masking, because we do still have to go back and scuff all this plastic before we can paint it. A little bit of overspray isn't gonna kill us here. Now, you also wanna make sure while you're doing this that you don't get any of the carpet fibers trapped under your tape. That'll leave little bits of your old color, and nobody wants that. Now, one thing I did forget to mention is before you actually go to spray this stuff, you wanna make sure that your carpet is nice and clean. So vacuum it up, use a carpet cleaner, or spray it down and scrub it out with a light brush. Just make sure there's no dirt or anything that's gonna cause issues with your dye. Now, while you're doing this, you wanna make sure that you're getting long, even strokes on your fabric, and you wanna spray at a little bit of an angle. And you also wanna make sure you're going a little light, because you don't want this stuff getting bunched up. It's gonna create big crunchy spots in your carpet if that paint dries at all. Now that we've got a couple of light coats in one direction, we're gonna give this a few minutes to flash off before we spray it the same way from the other direction. Now, if you were dealing with regular carpet as opposed to something with short fibers like this, you would wanna wait until it flashed off and then take a soft brush and just brush those fibers out, make sure none of them are clumped up, and you get full, even coverage. Now, this has short fibers, so there's no reason for us to brush it out. All we've got to do is wait a couple minutes, spray it again, and move along. I went ahead and took a red scuff pad to this door panel to get the surface abraded. After that, I took some wax and grease remover and got this thing wiped down. Now we're in the booth and ready to go. Now that the prep work's finished up, I've got our door panel hung up here in the booth. We're gonna get started hitting it with some of this adhesion promoter. The paint that we're using is a direct to metal or DTM paint, meaning that use of a primer is not necessarily required. However, we're painting on plastic, not metal, and we want to make sure that this paint latches on as good as possible. So this adhesion promoter is going to chemically abrade the surface in addition to the physical abrasion we did with our scuffing pad. Once we spray 2 light coats of this, we're ready to get our color laid down. For our color, we're going to be using some hot rod black so we match the rest of the interior panels we've already painted. With our paint cured, I've got this door panel back in the studio. We're gonna go ahead and get some adhesive sprayed on both of our surfaces. Now, you don't wanna do too crazy of a coat, but you definitely want a good bit on there. Just make sure this is fully covered. I went ahead and taped up around the edges of our carpet as well, because this stuff gets a little messy, as you can see, and that is gonna make sure that it doesn't wrap around and get caught up in all the fibers. All right, now that we've got both of our surfaces sprayed, I'm having Mike give me a hand real quick, just getting this laid down, because I can do it by myself, but it's a lot easier having an extra set of hands. And we're gonna start by rolling outward. Make sure these edges get in nice and tight. Helps if you keep just a little bit of backwards pressure on your carpet. That way everything stays nice and straight.
And just like that, we have essentially a brand new door panel. Now all that's left is just put a couple more pieces on here and then we're ready to get it put in the truck.
All right. While Eric was busy finishing up our door panels, I went ahead and hung our front bumper. These are Kelderman Manufacturing's Bravo Series bumpers. We got ours in raw and we paint matched it to our truck. For the lights, we went with XK Glow's 20-inch light bar in the middle and their C3 cube lights on the side. This thing's gonna light up the night.
Now, anytime you modify your vehicle's ride height, the engine, transmission, or transfer case combination, well, there's a high probability that's gonna affect the drive shaft length. And that's very common to have to change the drive shaft for your vehicle when you modify it. And that's what we've had to do here with our Dodge with the lift kit and the different transmission. So I want to show you some differences here, or some specifics about these drive shafts. Now this drive shaft right here, I pulled out from the warehouse because it's a slip yoke design. Now this is not for our truck, but it's a different one. This is the most common design of the drive shaft. The slip yoke, it slides in the back of the transmission. And the reason it has a slip yoke design is as the rear end moves up and down for suspension articulation, well, that drive shaft has to change length because the transmission is fixed, but the rear end's moving up and down. So this slides in and out of the back of the transmission to accommodate for that length change. Well, ours isn't that easy. They have to do a two-piece design, or this telescoping style, because on the back of the transfer case is a fixed yoke as opposed to the slip yoke. So as the suspension articulates, moves up and down, this length between the yoke of the rear end and the transfer case is going to change length. So to accommodate that, this drive shaft will plunge inside of itself or telescope to achieve that length change. And on our front drive shaft, we have a similar design with that telescoping unit, but what makes this one unique is the double cardan joint. It has two U-joints built in here. That way we can achieve a greater angle of attack from the transfer case down to the front differential. So to get your custom drive shaft, you need to know the length, and each manufacturer has their specific way of measuring the length for your drive shaft. Ours wants us to go from the face of the pinion at the yoke coming out of the rear end to the transfer case, the yoke coming out of the transfer case, that length along with the U-joint size. Now these U-joints come in different sizes depending on your horsepower and torque application. And to measure this, well, we just take our calipers here and we can get the diameter of the cap along with the width of that U-joint. So the series of U-joint, the length of your drive shaft is the information you need to get your own custom drive shaft. Enough about these, let's get them installed in the truck.
To say that this truck has made an extreme transformation would be a little bit of an understatement. I mean, inside and out, this truck has come full circle from the day we picked it up. Now, it was a good, solid work truck when we started, but you can't really go wrong if that's what you're looking for, and your choice is a W350 Cummins, or a D350 if you're just going on the road. I think one of the most impressive things that I've noticed about this since we got it done is probably the fact that for no more work than we did, we have seen an insane increase in performance out of that 12 valve. Really, if we're doing no more than a turbo, some bigger injectors, manifold, and that P-pump swap, I mean, it is a night and day difference on the road. Now, this thing didn't have a whole lot of get up when we first got it because it wasn't supposed to, right? This is a work truck. It's not meant for going fast. But if you need to pull a house down, this is the set of keys that you're grabbing. Not only can it still do that, but now it's pretty dang quick. And it's got a lot more style than it did before. And even out here when there's not a whole lot of heads to turn, this thing is turning some heads. Believe it or not, I think this thing actually rides a little bit better now on the 35s in the lift than it did in stock form. I don't know exactly how that works, but for a lifted dually, this thing is pretty nice going down the road. A lot smoother than I would have expected, for sure. There's that gear. I'm getting the feeling from this one that this is one of those trucks you got to be a little bit careful with. If you give it just a little bit too much, she's liable to get away from you. And I know that sounds a little crazy for a build like this that didn't get a whole lot of crazy engine work done, but believe me when I tell you, this thing wants to go. From the outside, you would never know unless somebody told you that this is the same truck we pulled in last year. With the darker gray in the middle and the pitch black on the top and the bottom, down to that blood red pinstripe front to back, this thing looks about as mean as it could get. Then you add in the custom lighting on the outside, you've got one menacing profile, especially in the dark. These last couple seasons on Music City trucks have been great, and I wouldn't trade the experience for the world, but I think it's time to move on and get back to something that's a little bit more mean. So we'll see you guys a little further on down the road.